Hey guys, welcome to a new video. Like, comment and subscribe if you enjoy. Without any further interruptions, enjoy the What If. Chapter 11. Reunions. She had just finished sending off the soldats to commence with the invasion, when she heard a voice she loved to hear more than anything. The content, not so much. His Majesty requires your service, Sternritter Gewel. Ugh, come off it. I don't like it when you call me like that, said Giselle, sending Ichigo a stink eye and sticking her tongue out in a childish way. The act received a rather mirthful chuckle from Ichigo in response. Fine, fine, still, His Majesty did ask me to send you to him, Gigi. I'm sure you'll like what you find there, Ichigo said in a rather amused tone. It wasn't that much of a surprise to Ichigo that Giselle's eyes lit up instantly when she heard what he said, since there weren't that many things she actually liked. If he didn't count himself, and the other girls, well, there was basically one thing left, which would be a new collection for her to make into a zombie. Despite how much the thought of his girlfriend tinkering with corpses turned him off, Ichigo couldn't bring himself to hate her for it. He knew that Giselle was kind of borderline insane, but everyone had their own flaws, even if Giselle's was a tad bit more serious than the others. Well, maybe a hell lot more serious. But at least she did promise to him that she wouldn't do anything morally wrong after they won the war, which basically meant that she wouldn't turn any innocents to zombies. Honestly, it was a big relief to know that she was willing to change for the better, or as better as she could get. Oh, all right, I'll see you later at Silburn, then. Oh, and I got what you asked. The whole place was empty, so it was a bit too dull. Giselle replied with an exaggerated sigh, and left immediately after placing a long wooden container in his hands. To think of it, nearly every person he had befriended over the past year had their own flaws, but Ichigo still considered them as his friends with or without them. Well, except Jugram, who was just so damn perfect and noble. The man's flaw was that the man didn't have any flaws, really. Liltato's shrift could be considered as cannibalism, so that was a rather big one. Actually, if he thought about it more, that might be more of a problem compared to even Giselle's. But still, Liltato was okay as long as her never-ending hunger was satisfied. While her habit of using foul words constantly kind of grew on him, it was still another one of Liltato's flaws too. Bambietta was extremely short-tempered, and when he says extremely, he wasn't kidding. She tended to lose her temper easily when she heard something she didn't like without hearing the whole story firsthand. She was violent, and a little bloodthirsty too. Well, not so little, since Ichigo knew that she would have enjoyed killing any Shinigami she came across during this invasion. Her habit of releasing her stress from killing someone, which he had only heard about, since she had been warned to cease the act before he joined the Wandenreich, was rather disconcerting, but at least she did have some self-control. Right. I should really help her find some way to let her stress loose. Maybe she might be interested in the violent kind of video games. I'll have to prepare plenty of spare controllers in that case, though. Kang was a decent enough guy in his opinion, even if his loyalty to His Majesty was fanatic to say at the least. Kang would gladly accept death as long as the Emperor was the one to kill him, and follow any kind of orders His Majesty would give him. It wasn't necessarily bad, but such blind loyalty could be considered as a flaw. He could be a bit too much on the arrogant side from time to time, but it was harder to find someone who didn't have an ounce of arrogance among the Sternritter, so that wasn't anything special. Mask could be a little hard to follow due to his enthusiasm, which was kind of borderline annoying sometimes. Ichigo knew that Mask was mostly hiding his real self under his hero facade, but he still considered him as one of his friends. In all honesty, he would be more concerned if Mask's hero facade wasn't an act, but his real self. Seriously, who could blame him? Bazz-B apparently held his own grudge against His Majesty, and honestly, everyone knew that he did. He wasn't as discreet as he thought himself to be, and even the Emperor found it to be amusing. The general opinion about Bazz-B among the Sternritter was that he was an annoying, arrogant jerk, but he was a decent enough company to Ichigo. Bazz-B was like what Renji was to Ichigo before he swore vengeance at the red-haired lieutenant. They regularly bashed their heads, but got along well in the end. Candace had her own temper, but it wasn't anything like Bambietta's. Bambietta's temper was, well, volatile, explosive, vindictive, and it was something really legendary. The memory of a near-bald Bazby was still clear in his mind, after all. Candace on the other hand was equally or even more short-tempered than Bambietta, but that was all there was. She didn't blow up everything even if she did lose her temper, although it wouldn't be a pleasant experience for the others if they were in close contact with a pissed-off Candace. It was relatively easy to calm her down, though, at least for him, since all it took was some soothing gestures and compliments on his part. Other than that, he really couldn't bring up any major flaws she might have had. Well, her obsession with her hair could be considered as one, but still, nothing major. And he rather liked her hair if he were to be honest. Menina's was soft-spoken, kind, gentle, caring, and probably many things he could compliment on. But that didn't mean she was perfect, though. Ichigo knew from experience that Menina's was hard to anger, but if someone did push her over the edge. Ichigo shuddered for a moment when he thought of what Menina's could do when she was pissed off. All he needed to say was that her shrift was the power, for a good reason. Note to self, never give her a reason to get mad when she's holding my hand. There was also the fact that she didn't have that much of a good control over her strength, and Ichigo was thankful that she took special care in controlling her strength when he was near her. Neither of them wanted her to break his hips or something like that. Menina's wanted to be pampered like a princess, but that wasn't even half as bad as the others in his opinion. He really needed someone who had a grasp of normalcy if he wanted to keep his sanity intact with all the people around him, and thankfully Menina's fit the bill, for most of the time, anyway. At least someone enjoyed literature, regardless of the genre. Quilge was a sadistic bastard for sure, but Ichigo actually appreciated it, thanks to the amount of pain he had inflicted on Tsukishima before his death. As far as he knew, Tsukishima's last days were a living hell for the Fullbringer. Quilge also made surprisingly good company, which was something he really didn't expect from the man. His presence was always welcome when the guys hung out due to his wicked sense of humor, sometimes making even Kang to crack a smile. Askin was, well, just Askin for the lack of a better description. He was an eccentric guy for sure, and sometimes he was even harder to follow than Mask, which was quite the feat in itself. His self-preservation was on a legendary level, such as always mysteriously disappearing right before Bambietta's temper tantrums, or knowing the limits of how much he could tick others off without getting in trouble for it. He was the last person Ichigo expected to die in this war, not that he expected the others to die in the first place. There were the other Sternritter and the Schutzstaffel, but they were more of an acquaintance than a friend to him. Some were more tolerable than others, and some were not. But if he was given a choice again on whether he would join the Wandenreich again or not, he wouldn't change a thing. So, what now, Zangetsu? Ichigo said, seemingly to himself. How should I know, you dumbass? It's not like I have any actual experience with this. Ask the old man, not me. Ichigo sighed when he heard the distorted voice in his head, and muttered. Fine, your thoughts, Asan. I would suggest that you hold the Asachi, and channel your Raryoku into it. Since you already know our names, that should be enough to change the Asachi into a proper form for us. Got it, said Ichigo, opening the lid of the container. Ichigo ran his hand over the blade of the plain Asachi before pulling it out, and held it by the hilt with both of his hands. He stared blankly at the Asachi for a few seconds, realizing just how much he had missed holding Zangetsu in his hands, despite it being his foe Zanpakuta. Sure, he was perfectly fine with being a Quincy, with an added dosage of hollow. But Zangetsu was born from his soul, and even if he decided to rely mostly on his Quincy side there was always something missing. So he planned on taking an Asachi for himself during the first strike, but he was rather late on schedule thanks to Giselle's little scheme. He would have chose to stick to the original schedule even if Giselle had meddled a little with his plans, but he just had to meet Rukia out of all people. So Ichigo nicely asked Giselle to do a favor for him. In other words, he ordered her to fetch an Asachi from the Shina Academy. Ichigo knew that Giselle would probably do anything for him to earn his forgiveness, not that he was all that mad with her, so he gave her a simple task and let her off the hook. To his surprise, Ichigo found himself surprisingly eager to hold his very own Zanpakuta, the real Zangetsu, and not a fake. He still preferred using his Quincy abilities and even his hollow side over the Shinigami side, but he knew that he would need everything he could use in his arsenal for the upcoming trials. Ichigo was positively sure that he could use his real Bankai now. He remembered the words of Zangetsu, of him being unable to withstand the power of his Bankai. Ichigo knew that he was strong. It was a rather obvious statement, since he had just emerged victorious over a fight with the famed head captain of the Gote 13 himself. But he wasn't on the level of transcendence, the level he had reached when he used Mugetsu while in his final Getsuga Tensha state. Not yet, anyway. His Shrift, the Amnesia, was a ridiculously powerful ability with its power rivaling even the Almighty of His Majesty, which was truly befitting of the letter A. So he had consciously refrained from using his Shrift to its fullest for various reasons. First off, Ichigo had a good enough grasp on how to utilize his Shrift through extensive training, so he barely needed any more training on that part. Another reason was that he didn't like to use it in a fight he could enjoy, which was too much of a Kenpachi-like reason. But Ichigo really couldn't help his thirst for a good enough fight. Whether if it came from himself or his instinctual counterpart, he had absolutely no idea, but he didn't really care about it all that much. Ichigo briefly wondered if he would have challenged Zaraki for the title of Kenpachi, if he was actually born as a real Shinigami. Then again, Ichigo Kenpachi was kind of weird in his opinion. Yes, he was perfectly fine with being Kurosaki Ichigo. Technically Shiba Ichigo worked as well, but he had lived as Kurosaki Ichigo for his whole life, not to mention that the Kurosakis were Quincy's which he liked. Also, Ichigo was keeping himself from becoming overly reliant on his Shrift like some of the other Sternritter, such as Berenice, Pepe, and A.S., after realizing the importance of the mastery over the foundation of his skills. Ever since he started to refine his swordsmanship under the guidance of Jugram, Ichigo was able to notice the improvement in his overall prowess in combat. It led him to devote a fraction of his time each day to train himself, to become better in order to protect the people he held dear. Well, it wasn't like that from the beginning, though. When he first started to train himself, he did it mostly to prove his worth and usefulness to the Wandenreich. His insecurity of being discarded like a chess piece was rather serious at that time, but he was able to eventually get over it with the help of Bambietta. To say that he was surprised would have been an understatement, when Bambietta out of all people was the one who caught on the problem before anyone. Her words were crude and straightforward, but they were extremely helpful without a doubt. Ichigo would have never expected Bambietta to be the one to help him with a mental issue, but she was able to relate to the problem due to a similar experience. They had grown closer ever since, and he wouldn't hesitate for a second to say that his current best friend was Bambietta, even if he included all the other girls and male Sternritter. It didn't take long for Ichigo to find his purpose once more after that, to protect his girls, his friends, his family. Silbern was as much of his home as Karakura used to be, and he was proud to be a Sternritter of the Wandenreich. Now that he knew the consequences if he failed in his task all thanks to Tsukishima, he wouldn't be as lenient as he once was. If someone dared to threaten his precious people, they wouldn't live long enough to regret it. That was his vow. Well, here goes, Ichigo muttered, and channeled his Raryoku into the Asachi in his hands. Nothing seemed to happen at first, much to Ichigo's disappointment. A few more seconds had passed, and still nothing. Ichigo was about to ask old man Zangetsu if he had any more ideas, when he felt it. He could feel the connection forming between himself and the Asachi. No, his Zanpakuta changed its form into its sealed stage. It was a sensation he had never experienced when he was wielding his old sword, and all Ichigo could say was that it could even rival the moment when he began his path as a Quincy. While Ichigo didn't even doubt for a second that the connection he shared with both Zangetsu was stronger than most, if not all of the Shinigami, it became even stronger when he claimed the Asachi as his own. Their bond was now stronger than ever, and Ichigo understood instinctively that he could use all of his power to its full potential as of the moment. Ichigo examined the sealed Zanpakuta, which was a tachi at about 30 inches in length with a red Quincy Zyken outlined with black as its tsuba. He was rather surprised that his Zanpakuta actually had a sealed form, since his former one was always in its shikai. But then again, since it really wasn't his true Zanpakuta to begin with, it probably was true that there was no such thing as a constant release shikai. He was about to speak of his release phrase right then and there, when he sensed a disruption in the sky not that far from his current position. What the hell? A Garganta. Ichigo muttered, and his widened in surprise when it opened to reveal the newly arrived trespassers. There they were, his old friends that he hadn't seen for a whole year. His friends had hurt him emotionally when they were under the influence of Tsukishima's Fullbring, but still, they were his friends. Urya seemed to be equally surprised when his eyes found him, and Ichigo was able to notice the slight grimace in his friend's face. For what reason, he did not know. Orihime's eyes lit up with joy the moment she unexpectedly spotted her longtime crush, tearing up from all the pent-up emotions that struck her at that very moment. A part of her was afraid that Ichigo would hate them for what they had done while they were influenced by Tsukishima, despite knowing that the Ichigo she knew wouldn't hold it against them. But for the most part, she was worried sick about Ichigo ever since he disappeared from Karakura town without a trace. To her relief, Ichigo seemed not only fine, but in an even better physical state than before if she was being honest about it. Chad seemed to be barely standing, one of his arms draped over Urya's shoulders for support. His injury from earlier wasn't fully recovered yet, even with Orihime's Sa-ten Kishun. Orihime could have healed it completely with some more effort, but Chad insisted that she leave him be, stating that someone may need her help when they reached the Soul Society with the ongoing invasion. Orihime hesitated at first, but Chad's stubbornness emerged victorious at the end. What he didn't expect was to run into Ichigo as soon as they arrived in the Soul Society, and while he was half expecting him to be wearing a similar attire to the Quincy in Hawako Mundo, he was surprised at just how menacing Ichigo looked like with the white-clad uniform on him. Ichigo, it's good to see you again. Kurosaki. Kurosaki-kun, thank God, you're okay. Ichigo stared at the trio blankly, trying to comprehend just why they were here, and why they had arrived through a Garganta out of all things. What reason did they have to come to the Soul Society? As far as he knew, they shouldn't have been aware of the invasion until the first strike was over. He wasn't sure of what to say, seeing how the situation was extremely awkward for him. Not so thankfully, he didn't need to say anything. Kurosaki. A rough voice bellowed his name, instantly taking Ichigo's attention to himself. Grimjow. Ichigo muttered in confusion, as he took in the rapidly approaching form of the former espada and his sword. Despite being confused at the sight of a not-so-friendly face, Ichigo's free hand shot up and caught the Arrancar's Zanpakuto with ease. Grimjow seemed to be taken aback at first, but his surprised expression soon morphed into a bloodthirsty smirk. The Karakura trio flinched when they saw blue jagged lines tracing Ichigo's skin, realizing that Ichigo was using the same technique as the other Quincy from earlier. Ichigo wearing the same uniform as the man didn't help either, reminding them of their rather humiliating defeat. You've gotten stronger, Kurosaki ya, bastard. That's good, 'cause I've been waiting too long for this rematch. Grimjow yelled with glee. As far as I remember, you lost to me, even when I took several attacks of yours that were aimed at Inoue, said Ichigo with a frown. And I remember beating you up into a pulp with my bare hands. Don't tell me you're afraid of getting your ass kicked, Kurosaki. Please, as if I would be scared of you, scoffed Ichigo. He wasn't really sure why Grimjow would want to fight him again. No, actually he did. Grimjow did try to fight him again when he ended the fight by sparing the Arrancar's life, only to be cut down by Neutra immediately after that. But he didn't really think that the Arrancar would give him that much of a challenge. Grimjow wasn't by any means weak, being the Sexta Espada and all. But compared to Yamamoto using his Bankai, Ichigo didn't want to sound too arrogant, but unless Grimjow had a second release like Ulquiorra, there was absolutely no way he could lose in a fight against him. Grimjow's lips twisted into a full-blown grin, and tried to kick Ichigo into releasing his grip on his Zanpakuto. But Ichigo was much more faster. He let go of the Zanpakuto before the kick could connect with his body, and slid back a good few meters with his Flugbildskrit. Good, I hope you'd be a better match against me than the other guy in Hawako Mundo. I barely broke a sweat while fighting him, and he was pathetic as shit. Ichigo clenched his fists in realization. Of course, why would his friends come out of a Garganta with Grimjow out of all people? They were in Hawako Mundo for some reason, and probably met Quilge while they were there. Ichigo still didn't understand the reason behind Urya's grimace, but at least he now knew that Urya must have recognized his Sternritter uniform. Quote dot dot dot. What did you do to him? Asked Ichigo, already guessing the former Sexta Espada's answer to his question. Grimmjow wasn't the type to have any kind of mercy in his blood, which was something he could easily deduce from experience. Was that guy your friend or something? The bastard was fucking irritating, so I crushed his skull. Seriously, how annoying a guy could. He wasn't given the chance to finish his words, due to the iron-strong grip of Ichigo's hand that snatched his neck. Ichigo held up Grimmjow with his hand, constricting the Arrancar's neck with just enough strength, so that Grimmjow could only let out a wheezing breath instead of coherent words. Before anyone could react to his actions, Ichigo slammed Grimmjow to the ground and pinned him down with his foot planted on the former Espada's chest. Kurosaki! Yhwach yelled in disbelief while his Ginrei Kojaku formed immediately in his hands, aimed and ready to fire even before he realized the implications of his action. He was too surprised at this behavior of Ichigo, which was so unlike him, at least in comparison to the Ichigo they all remembered. But Ichigo paid him no mind, and drew out his sealed Zanpakuta from its sheath. He lowered the sword until the tip of the blade pricked Grimmjow's neck, causing a few drops of blood to seep out. Grimmjow's eyes widened in shock despite the pain he was feeling, realizing that Ichigo was able to penetrate his Hierro almost effortlessly. Sure, his Hierro wasn't anything near Neutra level strong, but it wasn't something that could be penetrated so easily with barely any effort. Regardless of your opinions on the guy, Quilge was indeed one of my friends. Even then, if it were any other Arrancar that killed him, I wouldn't feel obligated to do anything since he was on a mission of his own. But you on the other hand, I was the one who spared you that day. Clearly, it was a mistake on my part, Ichigo growled out with a scowl, and started to form a Sero on the blade of the Zanpakuta. I'll just have to rectify that mistake now. No, you can't, Kurosaki. I won't let you kill someone who just saved our lives. Yhwach interrupted, only to flinch when he saw the cold look Ichigo gave him. Ichigo stared blankly at Yhwach, his face devoid of any kind of emotions. He wasn't sure if he heard it correctly, but it seemed like Yhwach wanted to stop him from killing an Arrancar. Grimmjow saving his friends' lives. The thought was so alien to him. He saved your lives, you say? Tell me, Ishida, did Quilge actually try to kill you? Did he harm any of you in a way that Inoue couldn't patch you guys up? None of the Sternritter are allowed to kill or seriously maim any of you three, because I gave them a specific order not to, Ishida. Shouted Ichigo, putting more strength into his leg. Grimmjow struggled to get up, but nothing seemed to work. So don't you dare tell me what I can, and can't do. I'm going to kill him, and if you want to stop it, you're more than welcome to try. It was at the last moment when Ichigo was about to fire the overcharged Sero, that he changed his mind and swung his Zanpakuta at the sky instead of Grimmjow. An arc of red energy was released from the blade of the sword, causing the others to gasp as they felt the power Ichigo had under his disposal. They knew that Grimmjow would have been completely annihilated without a trace, if that Sero had struck him as Ichigo originally intended to. Just when did the bastard get this strong? Thought Grimmjow, sweat drops trickling down his forehead. Yhwach couldn't really refute that claim, knowing that Quilge didn't really try to kill him or Chad despite his rough treatment. Besides, he knew that this wasn't about stopping Ichigo from killing the Arrancar. He just didn't want to watch Ichigo kill someone out of cold blood, to know that he had changed enough to actually kill someone like this. He wasn't sure if he was proud of his heritage as a Quincy anymore, if that was the case. But what about me, Kurosaki-san? You wound me, interrupted the jovial voice of Urahara Kazuki, and Ichigo once more caught another Zanpakuta, this time between his fingers. Ichigo knew that it wasn't a good decision on his part, since Kazuki's Zanpakuta was actually in its Shikai unlike Grimmjow's, which was sealed. But he doubted that Kazuki would outright strike him with anything more than a calculative jab. It really wasn't like Kazuki to do so. Those three needed my protection in case they got involved somehow with this war, which they did, but you on the other hand, not so much. I wasn't expecting you to get yourself involved in the war this early either, Urahara. How did you find out? Asked Ichigo. Well, I was expecting this to happen sooner than later, in case you're wondering. But that wouldn't explain me being here, yes. You see, Nel-san dropped out of the sky, and asked for our help in rescuing her brother Dondochaka-san, so everything kind of happened from there," replied Kazuki, not at all fazed by the lack of the usual honorific Ichigo used when he said his name. "Wait a second." Ichigo furrowed his brows in confusion. "Nell is under my protection, along with her companions. Why would she need help to rescue Dondochaka?" Kazuki let out a nervous chuckle, and scratched the back of his head. Apparently he was hiding under the dunes, because he was afraid of getting caught by the Quincy army in Hueco Mundo. "Oh, and would you mind letting go of my Benihime now? She doesn't take someone manhandling her kindly, including even myself." "I see. You know, Urahara-san, I blamed you for a lot of things back then," Ichigo started, surprising Kazuki. But then again, Kazuki knew that Ichigo wasn't the type to beat around the bush. "But I always thought that you were a manipulative bastard, albeit with good motives, and I also know that you had your reasons at that time. So I'll give you a piece of advice, and I suggest that you listen to it. Take them," Ichigo pointed at the Karakura trio when he said this, "and go back to the world of the living. This war is between us Quincy and the Shinigami, and nothing good will come out of it if you choose to interfere, not on their side, at least." "No, we won't Ichigo. You can stop this nonsense and come back with us. Everyone misses you, and all of your friends would like nothing more than to see you again," said Chad. "Why would you side with them, Kurosaki-kun? What about your friends in the Soul Society?" asked Orihime, with small drops of tears visible in the corner of her eyes. "Well, Inoue was always too much of a kind-hearted person for her own good," thought Ichigo, nearly rolling his eyes at her question. He realized this, and a small frown crept up on his face. A downside of hanging out with Bambiette out of all people on a daily basis. "She rubs off on you." Only Urya chose to be silent among the trio, since he knew that Ichigo wouldn't be wavered by their words no matter what. He was a stubborn idiot, and nothing less of bringing him back with force would work. The possibility of the option was slim to non-existent. Grimmjow was still struggling under Ichigo like an insect, and Kazuki's Zanpakuto was held firmly in Ichigo's fingers. If Ichigo was able to use the upgraded version of the Let's Still like the other Quincy they met earlier, his own arrows would prove to be ineffective. What chance did they actually have at subduing Ichigo with force? "That's funny to hear. Do tell, why wouldn't he side with us?" Everyone's attention was shifted instantly to the owner of the voice, who gracefully landed behind Ichigo out of nowhere. The girl with dark brown hair was someone only Ichigo could recognize, and in all honesty he wasn't sure if having Bambietta here was a good thing. "Hey, Bambi, what brings you here?" Ichigo asked the Sternritter, somewhat relieved at the sight of her being unscathed. "Well, did you happen to see a doggy around here? You see, I was looking for him to finish him off properly, but he kinda ran off some time ago, barking some nonsense like, 'Genria, sai dono,' or something like that," Bambietta said with an Ichigo-like scowl. Neither of the Sternritter noticed the similarity between their scowls, but the others easily did. If the pair walked around Karakura town with those scowls on their faces, they would end up picking a fight with all the thugs and gangs around the town. He must have sensed the old man's reiatsu when I beat him. "Sorry about that," apologized Ichigo with a shrug, knowing that apologizing to Bambietta was a good method to keep her temper in check. It really wasn't a big deal, if compared to what he would have to deal with when Bambietta lost her temper. But you really shouldn't be surprised about it. Dogs do have a habit of running off with their tails tucked between their legs when they get scared, you know. He defeated the head captain, was the thought that crossed every single person's mind, barring the two Sternritter. Well, I guess that's what happens when they give out the captain's post to stray doggies, muttered Bambietta, a small grin forming on her lips. She was extremely satisfied at Ichigo's answers. It was then the others had realized the subject of their conversation. This girl was talking about Captain Komamura as if he was nothing more than a stray dog. "So, who are these guys?" asked Bambietta. "My friends from Karakura town," Ichigo answered uncertainly, since having two of them aiming their weapons at him kind of made his statement a bit off. Bambietta nodded while observing the friends of her current best friend, and possibly more if the idiot just picked up some courage and asked her out. One of the humans had the Reiatsu of a gemist Quincy, but she could see that he had some potential, despite being nowhere near the level of a Sternritter at the moment. The other two were humans, but with some kind of weird spiritual powers. The term was Fullbringers, if her memories served her correctly, but she didn't really care about that. But the girl. The fuck, thought Bambietta as she observed the orange-haired girl. The way she looked at Ichigo reminded her of a certain someone. It was the look meninas often had, when she was practically stripping off Ichigo's clothes with her eyes. The girl's assets were at least on par with Menina's too. Bambietta couldn't help but feel a pang of jealousy at the thought of an addition of another girl in Ichigo's little harem. Just the thought of it annoyed her to no end. No way, that was totally not happening, not on her watch. She could deal with the sight of her friends being all lovey-dovey with Ichigo, because she genuinely cared for them. But there was absolutely no way she was going to let this cow have her way with him. Bambietta decided to nip the bud before anything became solid. But how could she do just that? Oh, fuck it, I know that he's attracted to me, and it's not like he doesn't know that I like him. There's no way he couldn't know about it with Candace teasing me about it on a daily basis. I'll just make it official right here. Yeah, that sounds like a good enough plan. At least the girls won't be able to make fun of me anymore that way. So, mind answering me why you were about to kill one of your friends, and why the other two was trying to kill you? Asked Bambietta, draping her arms around Ichigo's neck while pressing herself to him. She had to stand on the tips of her toes to do that, though. For some unknown reason, which Bambietta could only thank God for, Ichigo managed to not blush beet red. Her plan wouldn't have worked all that well if Ichigo immediately started to blush, and showed signs of being uncomfortable with their intimacy. Bambietta barely withheld a smirk from forming when she saw the slight grimace along with a jealous glare on the girl's face. Now she could understand why Candace loved teasing her so much, while flaunting her relationship with Ichigo. She snuggled up even closer than before, not that there was any real difference. This one's not my friend. He was an enemy before I became a Sternritter, and apparently he killed Quilge. Huh, I don't really know the reason he's so worked up if I'm being honest. Urahara-san as well, I'm sure he wasn't trying to kill me. If he really was trying to do that, he would have used Akita on the level of number 90-something. And I know that you could have pulled it out on your own Urahara-san, Ichigo said with a shrug, letting go of Benihime. Kazuki immediately retreated to the side of the Karakura trio as soon as Ichigo released his grip on his Zanpakuta, wariness evident on his face. While it was true that he didn't need Ichigo to release his grip, Kazuki knew that the case would have been different if he had used his hand instead of his fingers. Kazuki couldn't fathom just how strong Ichigo was now if he really did manage to defeat the head captain, someone who had thousands of years of experience under his belt. Quilge lost to this guy. I can't really see that happening. Bambietta muttered in confusion. Despite her low opinion on Quilge, she doubted that he would have lost while using his Volsta unknown currency and dig. He was by no means an elite of the Sternritter, but he was still stronger than most. He wouldn't have been given the position as the executive hunting captain of the 1st Jagdarmy if he wasn't, not that it was much of a big deal in her opinion. He probably didn't get the chance to use his Volsta unknown currency and dig, or maybe he lost his Hylogenshine. Whatever, I spared his life once, and I'm not about to repeat that mistake again, said Ichigo, surprising everyone except Bambietta. But why, Kurosaki-kun, why do you have to kill him? Murmured Orihime, unsure if this was the Ichigo she knew. It was like he had become a completely different person. Another goody two-shoes, and she's a lot worse than many, thought Bambietta, mock-gagging in disgust. Urya noticed this and frowned, but chose not to say anything. He saw the way Ichigo treated the girl, and easily deduced that it wouldn't be wise of him to antagonize her. He knew that he had been overly subdued after the fight with Quilge, due to obvious reasons. Urya hated just how much he felt helpless during that fight, and he was still nowhere near coming up with a solution to that. He let his Ginrei Kojaku dissolve back to Reishi, knowing that it would be stupid of him to try something with another Quincy at Ichigo's side. Shouldn't it be a lot more obvious to you, Inoue? I still remember the way he kept targeting you during our fight, and he already killed one of us. I sure as hell won't give him the chance to harm someone I care about, said Ichigo. Deeply, I might add, Bambietta slyly added her piece, and suckled on Ichigo's neck, determined to leave a hickey on him. Ichigo shivered at the rather erotic act and Bambietta's implications of herself being that someone he cared about, while Orihime let out a small whimper at the sight of her crush being molested. Urya noticed the distress she was causing to Inoue, and glowered at Bambietta against his better judgment. Chad chose to turn away from the sight, unsure of what to think of it. If it were any other situation, Kazuki would have thrown in a piece of his own, but he wisely refrained from doing so. However, that didn't mean he succeeded in stopping himself from letting out a wolf whistle. When Ichigo heard this, he blushed lightly and swept Bambietta off her feet with his free arm, causing her to yelp in surprise while wrapping her arms around his neck tightly. He then put some distance between him and Grimmjow with Flugbildskrit, and half-growled into her ears. Bambi, we're going to have a talk about your improper behavior later. It's highly unbecoming of a Sternritter. It was more of an aroused growl, rather than a threatening one in Bambietta's opinion, or at least to her ears. She meekly nodded with a flustered look when he gently let her down, admittedly a little aroused from hearing his rough voice, and being swept off her feet. Get the fuck up, Grimmjow. Ichigo growled at the Arrancar, who coughed and wheezed while trying to catch his breath. Don't get me wrong, I'm still going to end your life. I just didn't feel comfortable with killing you in that state, that's all. Softy, said Bambietta in a sing-song voice, receiving a mock glare from Ichigo. If looks could kill someone, Ichigo swore that he would have died 1,000 times by now from the intensity of Grimmjow's glare. There were no signs of fear in his eyes, even after experiencing the massive gap between their strength. No, his eyes were filled with defiance to the brim. You're gonna regret this, you bastard. You see this scar, Kurosaki? The one you gave me. I'll let it heal after I beat you, and prove that I'm the one and only true king. Spat Grimmjow, tightening his grip around his Zanpakuta. If the jackass asked for it, who was he to say no? He raised his other hand at the now glowing blade, and raked it along the length of it and growled the words. Grind, Pantera. There was a massive spike in Grimmjow's Reiatsu levels, and a torrent of Reiatsu was expelled from the Arrancar's release, which caused violent gusts of wind to engulf the vicinity. But it didn't faze Ichigo, not even a little. He had already experienced men with greater Reiatsu to be intimidated by someone at Grimmjow's level. Ichigo raised his Zanpakuta, which gave everyone a proper view at the sword, earning surprised looks from the others. That's not the Zanpakuta Ichigo used to have. Chad muttered. Urahara-san, is that a sealed Zanpakuta? Urya asked, realizing that Ichigo actually wasn't wielding a sword forged out of reishi. He received a stiff nod from Kazuki, who was observing the sealed Zanpakuta warily. But didn't he lose his Shinigami powers for good? I thought that was the consequence for using the final Getsuga Tensha, but my eyes are telling me otherwise. Not exactly. If I were to give my speculations on the matter, I'd say that Kurosaki-san's spiritual powers were never lost, but simply in a dormant state. Think about it like this. If a battery is dead, you can't use it again until you recharge it. That's why I tried to restore Kurosaki-san's powers by repeating the process of how he gained his Shinigami powers for the first time. Emphasis on tried, since the Central 46 forbid us from doing so. But it seems that Kurosaki-san's Shinigami side was somewhat connected with his Quincy side, if he was able to regain it on his own. I see. Urya didn't really know what to say, so he just chose to not say anything. If his current Zanpakuta is in its sealed state, assuming that it is actually his and not a random Shinigami's, then it might be different from his Zanpakuta that we all remember, Kazuki stated. I doubt that Kurosaki would use someone else's Zanpakuta, and I can see a Quincy Zeiken at the handle of the sword. Paying no mind to the others, Ichigo made the choice to release his Shikai. He was confident that he could beat Grimmjow with his Quincy skills alone, even if the said Arrancar had released his Zanpakuta. But he was about to speak of his release phrase before they had arrived through a Garganta, so he thought that he might as well test out his Shikai on Grimmjow. Eclipse. There was an even more drastic rise in Ichigo's Reiatsu compared to Grimmjow's as he spoke of his release phrase, sending shivers down the spines of everyone near him. Orihime and Chad struggled to stay on their feet, barely withstanding the immense spiritual pressure being emitted from the orange-haired Sternritter. Bambietta on the other hand squirmed for a completely different reason, and licked her lips in anticipation. Her gaze lingered on the boy she held romantic feelings for, turned on by the sheer strength he possessed. She could practically feel the wetness between her legs. She rubbed her thighs without even realizing it, and bit her lower lips when she did, nearly letting out an aroused moan. She was extremely thankful that everyone's attention was focused on Ichigo. She really was. Eventually Chad collapsed, heavily affected from the Reiatsu due to his condition. Urya quickly supported him despite being under considerable pressure himself. Kazuki eyed the orange-haired Quincy cautiously, trying to gauge the strength of his one-time student from the Reiatsu alone. Zangetsu! Ichigo roared, and his sealed Zanpakuta melted into nothingness, or the others thought so until they realized that his Zanpakuta didn't just disappear when they saw it. It was an eerie sight for everyone to see. Visible darkness, forming all around Ichigo, which was similar to a shadow, but it was somewhere in between being a liquid and gas substance. For a single moment Ichigo's hollow mask flickered into existence on his face, but disappeared immediately as if to say that it was never there. Some of the darkness around him molded itself into a single Zanpakuta, which was a pitch-black sword at about 30 inches with a hollowed-out portion at the center of the blade. As soon as the blade had formed, darkness reigned supreme over light. It was as if the darkness around Ichigo was sucking in all of the light in the whole area, in order to assert its dominance over the light. None of them could speak a word until Ichigo let out a sigh of contentment, basking at the presence of his true Zanpakuta, or one of them to be precise. He could have chose to bring out both of course, but he didn't need to show off everything he could use, especially with Urahara Kazuki's presence. Old man Zangetsu was perfectly fine with it, since Ichigo usually preferred to use his Quincy skills. Zangetsu on the other hand, was enjoying every single second of the moment with a bloodthirsty grin plastered on his face. It didn't escape Ichigo's notice that the blade wasn't white like how it was in his inner world, though. "White's my color, you dumbass. You get to wield the black one now." Zangetsu cackled with glee, and Ichigo could easily picture him swinging around a carbon copy of his current blade, with the only difference being the color of it being white. Whatever, thought Ichigo, and flicked the blade once. He then raised Zangetsu, and pointed it towards Grimmjow, who had a wary look on him despite being in his beast-like Resurrexia cubed N form now. All of this development was new to him, but Grimmjow quickly shook off the shock and wariness. It didn't matter if his enemy had some new things up his sleeve. He was going to completely destroy the boy, rip him apart to shreds, and prove himself to be the one and only king. "Got yourself a new weapon, I see. But it means nothing, Kurosaki. It changes nothing, you hear." The blue-haired Aaronkar's words went ignored by Ichigo, as he flicked his Zanpakuta diagonally and muttered, "Getsuga Tensha." It was vastly different from what Grimmjow had experienced years earlier. It was made of the exact same darkness that was being emitted from the pitch-black Zanpakuta, and just the sight of it set off the alarms in Grimmjow's head. He would never admit it out loud, but he had felt primal fear at that moment. The kind one would feel when faced with an apex predator who could devour them with ease, just like the time when Aizen put him into his place for his rebellious attitude. It pissed him off greatly, but that wasn't the important thing now. He had to deal with the blurry black crescent wave, if he actually wanted to survive it. If he wanted to prove himself to be the true king, first and foremost he needed to survive. So he raised his arms, and crossed his claws in front of him to block his enemy's attack. He didn't doubt himself, not one bit. He had never doubted himself ever since that humiliating defeat he experienced against Aizen. Self-doubt only served to make you weak, and he had grown stronger ever since he stood by that belief. But his belief was about to be challenged. What the hell? It barely took a second for Grimmjow to realize that something was wrong. He expected the Sternritter to be much more stronger than the last time they fought, but he believed that he could beat him. He had grown stronger, at least stronger than the bastard Neutra. He wasn't sure of it, but he thought that he wasn't that far off from how strong the bat, Ulquiorra, was too. But then again, he had felt like Ulquiorra always had something more than he usually showed off, but it probably wouldn't have been that much of a big deal. This is way above any of the Espada, even compared to that brute Yami, when he's as fucking big as the whole Las Noches. Grimjow thought with a gulp, and felt his arms shaking uncontrollably. It wasn't a serious attack on Kurosaki's part, a simple flick with his fucking sword, and here he was, struggling to block the strike that should have been nothing. He had been pushed back more than at least 10 meters already from just the sheer power behind Kurosaki's technique before coming to a standstill. All of this was humiliating to him. It made him feel weak, just like the time when Aizen spoke of those words to him. Do not presume yourself to be anywhere close to someone of my caliber, Grimjow. Aizen had said those words to him in an amused voice, as he looked down upon the defeated form of the Panther Arrancar, the single most humiliating moment of Grimjow's life. The memory still haunted him to this day, always occupying a part of his mind. Grimjow wasn't about to let another person walk all over him as if he was nothing, to give him another humiliating defeat to haunt him. No, he knew that Kurosaki fully intended to end his life, and it wouldn't be able to haunt him if that happened. But he wouldn't be able to prove himself to be the king, above all. He wouldn't allow that. Never, never, never. Grog. Grimjow roared as he pushed back against the black crescent, pushing over his own limits. Blue light shone on his claws as he slowly, but firmly pushed back the Getsuga Tensha. There was a screeching sound as his claws finally teared through the Getsuga and dissipated the attack. The light on his claws kept on growing, and morphed into 10 claw-like blade of Raryoku. Desgara Cube Den, yelled Grimjow, as he flung all 10 of the blades at Ichigo's direction. But Ichigo was long since prepared. He had already swiped his palm on his blade with his blood artery active, and the enhanced blood combined with his hollow Raryoku had lit up the blade of Zangetsu with a midnight black Sero, which was nearly as strong as his Heiliger Blitz. Gran Rei Sero, said Ichigo, releasing a powerful midnight black beam from Zangetsu. Much to everyone's surprise, Ichigo's Gran Rei Sero effortlessly destroyed Grimjow's most powerful technique, and it didn't even waver at all. Fuck. Grimjow let out a curse before he was engulfed by the blackish Gran Rei Sero, which exploded upon contact. Violent gusts of wind stormed the whole area, causing everyone to shield themselves from the wind. Bambietta merely held onto her cap with her hand and stood firm, while her cloak and hair fluttered wildly all over the place. Only one thought crossed her mind, though. I think even Candace would have been pissed at Ichigo if she was here in my place. Kazuki was holding onto his bucket hat the same as Bambietta, but he was staring at Ichigo. His Zanpakuta, to be precise. He could tell that Ichigo's new Zanpakuta was different from his original one, but he could figure out something from the Reiatsu that was leaking out of him. Ichigo's current state was vastly similar to the Vizards when they had their mask formed on themselves, or an Arrancar in its sealed state. He could tell that this version of Zangetsu was extremely close related to the hollow aspect of Ichigo. Kurosaki, this has gone too far. Urya yelled, only to recoil in shock at the glare he received from Ichigo. The coldness in his eyes were so foreign and unlike Ichigo that he knew, and it chilled him to his bones. Is that so, Ishida? Ichigo said with a chuckle. As much as he just wanted to finish everything and return to Silburn for some well-earned rest, he owed Urya for standing on his side until the very end back when Tsukishima and Jinja was toying with them. Not only Urya but his friends deserved to know the truth. You know, I asked His Majesty once, the reason he didn't include you in our war preparations. Do you want to know what he said? That caught Urya's interest. He had hoped that Yhwach would reach out and attempt to recruit him, which could have led them to Ichigo's whereabouts. It never happened, much to his displeasure. All the others were disappointed and relieved at the same time, since they knew that it could place him in danger if it came to be. But Urya was more than ready to take the risk. That's what friends did, and while he wouldn't admit it out loud, he considered Ichigo as his friend. What did he say? He said that. Ichigo trailed off in a dramatic way, almost causing Urya to growl in annoyance. One less of his children partaking in the war was perfectly fine with him, since the matter of our victory was never in doubt, so he saw no reason to recruit you to fight alongside us. But he also said that you will be joining us on your own accord when the time comes. I have no idea where to start, but first off, I'm not one of Yhwach's children. Urya said with a twitch in his eyebrow, causing Ichigo to roll his eyes. It's not that he actually thought of Yhwach as his real father or something. Kurosaki Isshin was, and always will be his father. But Ichigo also knew that Yhwach genuinely saw each and every Quincy as one of his children, and meant it when he called them his. Yhwach had earned just about enough of his own respect to say that he was no longer bothered when he called him that. Second, he's awfully delusional if he thinks that I'll join the person who killed my mother. Yhwach growled out, clenching his fist in anger. He then glared at Ichigo and continued. What I don't get, is the reason you're so into this, Kurosaki. Yhwach is the one who killed your own mother. Why would you fight for him, this nonsense of his empire, against the Shinigami, your friends? There was silence, before a cough interrupted their discussion. Ichigo caught the fallen form of Grimmjow in the middle of a crater out of the corner of his eyes, but turned his focus on his conversation with Yhwach. He could deal with Grimmjow after this. You know what I find funny, Ishida? Asked Ichigo, causing Yhwach to furrow his brows in confusion. You seem to be dead set against the Wandenreich, where everyone is your fellow Quincy, but not so much against the Gote 13. Who massacred our own kind because of the fact that our existence was disrupting their supposed balance. I distinctly remember the fact that Kuretsuchi Mayuri was the one who basically killed your grandfather with his orders, for the sake of obtaining his precious experiment material. Am I wrong? It was you who affected me, who made me to let go of most of my hatred towards them. What the hell is wrong with you, Kurosaki? This is nothing like you. Ichigo was taken aback at first when he heard Yhwach's outburst. His fellow Quincy was behaving awfully like how he would have done in this situation, but he couldn't really blame him. It really was him, who made Yhwach even consider the idea of working together as a Shinigami and Quincy. He didn't regret the act itself though, since he had grown out of his burning hatred for the Shinigami as a whole. Everything changed when I learned the truth, Ishida. I don't hate His Majesty, because the Ozwa unknown currency HLEN wasn't the actual cause of my mom's death, and it probably would have been the same for yours. None of us truly know the cause of hers, but I can assure you that the Ozwa unknown currency HLEN can't kill someone who does not have a piece of His Majesty's soul in them. But I think that's a topic for another time. There is no proof that what Kurosaki's saying is the truth, but would he really lie to me about something like this? Yhwach thought as he stared at Ichigo impassively. Ishida, I'll tell you the actual cause of my mom's death. It was the Hollow Grand Fisher who directly killed her, but there was someone else responsible for her death. Someone whose job was to protect human souls from the Hollows and cleanse their existence. That someone was the person who willingly allowed my mom to die at the hands of that Hollow, and he would have allowed me to die too, if it weren't for the stirring of a certain part of my soul. Ichigo growled, and took a few deep breaths to calm down. He then spoke in a soft voice. It was Abarai Renji, someone I considered to be a friend, who let my mom die that day. Yhwach's face turned into the one of horror at the revelation, since he could relate with the experience. The hatred he thought that he had gotten over, the one he had buried deep within him, flared back to existence. Of course, he had been blinding himself. How could he have placed even an ounce of trust on the very people who massacred their own kind? But that's not all. My mom wasn't even allowed peace even in the afterlife. She was such a wonderful woman, and she had to suffer even after her death, all thanks to the stupid R&D department of these Shinigami. There were two people I swore to have vengeance after Tsukishima, and I had the pleasure of achieving my revenge on that fucking clown today. He'll never be able to harm a single soul again, and I'm glad that I killed him, Ishida. Orihime let out a gasp of horror at the revelation of the horrible sins the Shinigami had committed to Ichigo's mother, but also of Ichigo admitting to have killed the 12th Division captain with his own hands. Chad was uncertain of everything that was going on, but he felt his trust on the Shinigami diminishing after hearing Ichigo's entire story. I didn't know. Yhwach muttered, unsure of whether to be upset that Kurosaki was the one who killed the captain, or to be grateful at him for succeeding in what he had failed back then when he used the Quincy. Let's still. I would have been surprised if you did, Ishida, and I'm more surprised that you didn't, Urahara-san, said Ichigo, but Kazuki was too busy digesting all this information in his head to respond. He could finally understand why the Central 46 had banned them from restoring Ichigo's powers. But anyways, my time here is limited, so we'll see each other another time. I'm sure I gave you a lot to think about, Ishida. Oh, and Urahara-san. I did ask Shaolin to relay my words to Yoruichi, but I suppose I should tell you in person since it came to this. Our goal is not destruction, but a replacement. As Ichigo turned around to properly finish off the barely conscious former Sexta Espada, Kazuki's eyes lit up immediately upon hearing Ichigo's message. There was going to be a change, regardless whichever side emerged victorious. The question was, which would be for the better? I see that you've been very busy, Kurosaki-san. Now, what should I do? Any last words, Grimmjow? Fuck off. Suit yourself, Ichigo muttered, and brought up his Zanpakuta. What Grimmjow didn't know was that his hollow Zangetsu did not purify a hollow soul. It devoured it, even though its strength wouldn't increase since it had long since reached the rank of Vasto Lord. His Quincy Zangetsu on the other hand destroyed a hollow soul, so he was no longer capable of purifying a hollow soul unless his Zanpakuta was in its sealed state. Maybe that was the consequence of the choice he had made back then, to forego his Shinigami side. Ichigo wanted Grimmjow to pay for his actions regarding Quilge, so he chose this option over the other two. Grimmjow would be freed when he himself died, which probably wouldn't be for a very long time. I reject. Everyone froze, when Orihime's Santon Keshun formed in front of Ichigo, and stopped his Zanpakuta for a short moment before it shattered. Bambietta glared at the girl, while the others stared at her in disbelief. What stopped Ichigo from finishing Grimmjow's life with that blow wasn't the barrier, but Orihime's act itself. You know what? I'm not that surprised, Inoue. You were always soft, too soft for your own good. You really were supposed to enjoy your life to its fullest as a normal human, not get involved with all this mess of the afterlife. I really hope that you make the right choice after this, Inoue, said Ichigo, as his sword reverted back to its sealed state, and then dissolved into reishi as if it were a normal reishi weapon. Orihime thought that Ichigo chose to spare the Arrancar's life, and nearly let out a sigh of relief. The old Ichigo she had grown to love was still there, after all. Sadly, that belief did not last long. Orihime's eyes widened in shock when a black orb of hollow Raryoku gathered at the tip of Ichigo's forefinger. She recognized it as the very same technique that once took Ichigo's life over the domes of Las Noches. She knew that it was meaningless for her to try to stop him again, but she couldn't help but to say the words. Please, don't do it, Kurosaki-kun. Please, you're better than this, I know it. No, I'm not, Inoue, thought Ichigo, and uttered the words that would end the blue-haired Arrancar's existence. Sero Ascuras. The sound of Orihime's muffled cries weighed on his heart as the beam of black destroyed Grimmjow's body, but Ichigo couldn't bring himself to regret his decision. How much had he changed for the better, and how much for the worse? If Orihime reacted like this to him, what would be the reaction of his sisters? No, he did what was needed to be done. Even if his sisters resented him for the changes he went through, he would protect them no matter what. Hey Ichigo, I think our time's almost up, said Bambietta, as she placed her hand on Ichigo's shoulder. Anything left that you need to do? No, probably not, stated Ichigo, who let out a groan afterwards. Ugh, I really want to head back and get some rest. To think that it'll be rougher than this the next time. I could use some sleep too, now that you said it. And I wouldn't mind some company either. Bambietta whispered into his ears in a seductive voice, or what she thought to be one. We have to talk about us first, Bambi. Fine, but all of you knew this would happen anyway. Bambietta mumbled with a small deflated pout. What she didn't expect was for Ichigo to wrap his arm around her waist, and pull her closer to him. She yelped in surprise at first, and blushed lightly at the intimacy between them, but soon melted into his embrace. However long the wait was, she was going to enjoy everything that awaited her. I don't really hold what happened back then against you guys, since I chose to join the Wandenreich because His Majesty offered his help with the situation with Tsukishima, not to mention the fact that I wanted to become a Quincy like my mom. I didn't return when I dealt with Tsukishima, because I had become a Sternritter by then, said Ichigo, his eyes not meeting with any of his friends. I knew the moment I accepted the offer to join the Wandenreich, that things would probably never be the same again. It might hurt you guys to hear it, but I don't regret my choice. What will happen after this war, though, we'll see about that when the time comes. No one knew how to respond to Ichigo's words, as the shadows started to stir behind the Sternritter pair. The silence didn't last long, though. "Chad, do me a favor, will you?" Ichigo asked, receiving an affirmative grunt from the tall part Mexican. "I want you to help protect my sisters from the Soul Society. Frankly, I don't trust them to leave them out of this war. I'm not sure if my old man alone would be enough. Not that I don't have any safety measures prepared, but the more hands the better to ensure my sister's safety." "I will, Ichigo," Chad answered firmly. He had made up his mind to uphold their promise to have each other's back. If Ichigo entrusted him with his sister's safety, he would gladly accept. Now having the full story, to know that Ichigo didn't hold anything against him for the incident a year ago helped him in that regard. "Thanks, Chad," said Ichigo along with a nod of gratitude, before he and Bambietta were engulfed by the shadows. It truly was good to know that he could still place his trust on the giant, which brought out a genuine smile on his lips. Even as the Sternritter pair disappeared through the shadows, Kazuki and Urya were still deep in thought about their future actions. They could sense the Wandenreich retreating from the Seraiti, successful in their mission of annihilating the Soul Society. The Wandenreich had won the first round. It saddens me to know that Sternritter J, L, O, Q, R, U, and Y have fallen in battle and no longer with us, but we shall make sure that their sacrifice won't be in vain. In 5 days' time we shall strike, and bring down the Soul Society to their knees for good." Ichigo let His Majesty's words slide as he stood alongside Jugram, thinking about how everything would fold from now on. 5 days, he could probably use 3 days for some rest and relaxation, and the last 2 days to prepare himself into full condition before everything becomes much more serious. All the Raryoku he had used during his fight with Yamamoto was having its toll, not to mention his use of Volsta unknown currency Dig which drained his stamina considerably. His thoughts then wandered to the topic of his family. He would need to get into contact with them soon enough, and make sure that his sisters were well protected under his old man. Bringing them to Silburn wasn't a bad choice, but he didn't want his sisters to get involved with this whole war situation. If the situation calls for it, he would bring them in for their safety, but he wanted them to enjoy their normal life for now. Of course, he fully intended to give them the choice of learning the ways of the Quincy once the war reached its conclusion, but no earlier than that. If his old man actually placed his priorities on protecting his sisters, Ichigo knew that he could trust him. Shiba Isshin was a captain in his own right, and that was more than enough to at least stall the time for him to intervene if 2 or more captains become involved. But he highly doubted that the Gote 13 had any captains to spare for such a mission that involved his sisters, so all of this was just a measure of precaution. Ichigo, the orange-haired Sternritter, was brought out of his thoughts when Jugram called his name. He noticed that His Majesty had already left, as did some of the Sternritter. The rest of them were holding a discussion among themselves, undoubtedly sharing their experiences in the invasion. "Yes, Jugram, were you successful in obtaining your Zanpakuta? If so, I wish to see your capabilities whilst using your Zanpakuta at your earliest convenience." "Well, of course I was. As for our spar, I was thinking of having some rest for 3 days, so anytime after that works good for me." "I see, that is reasonable," Jugram said with a small nod, and turned to take his leave. "We are glad that you chose to stand on our side, Ichigo," Jugram added before he started to walk away. Ichigo blinked for a second, before he replied to Jugram with a faint grin. "So do I, Jugram. Sa ten Kishun, I reject." A smile crept onto Retsu's lips as Orihime treated the Captain Kuchiki of the 6th Division, stabilizing the rather grievous state of the man. The state of some of the Shinigami that were brought in for medical treatment was beyond her capability of healing, but this human girl's ability was a miracle in itself. She didn't hesitate for asking the girl's help as soon as she stepped into the Sagakya Go Sumesho, not that she really need to ask. Orihime immediately jumped at the chance to heal the people that were being brought in, now that the first invasion had come to an end. Urya was not at all pleased with her choice, but let her do what she wanted to and left for the world of the living alongside Chad with Kazuki's help. It wasn't to say that Orihime didn't understand where Urya and Ichigo stood in this situation, but it was also against her nature to ignore a person who needed her help. "If it helps you to know, Inoue-san, the number of Shinigami that were brought in for medical treatment was the highest in the 13th Division, Retsu said in her usual kind voice. Orihime glanced at the kind healer with confusion evident in her eyes. It means that the death toll of the 13th Division was the lowest in the entire Gotei 13, and your friend, Kurosaki-san, was the one who fought with the 13th Division. Oh, that's good to hear, Orihime said with a rather forced smile. Sure, she was glad that the Ichigo she knew must be there, somewhere deep inside him. But after her encounter with Ichigo, she was still shell-shocked at the change her crush had went through over the year he had gone missing. The captain smiled warmly at the kind-hearted girl, and steeled her resolve. She wasn't proud of what she was about to do, but she wasn't going to stop either. Inoue-san, I have a big favor to ask of you. Retsu started off. Okay, she replied with uncertainty. No, Inoue-san. This isn't something you should accept that easily, said Retsu with a warm smile tugging on her lips. The girl truly was a kind soul, and she really felt bad for taking advantage of it. You see, the current situation requires my presence in the front lines as a combatant, being a captain of the Gotei 13. While I have no doubts about Azane's capability to manage our division, she will need someone to help alongside her. Would you be willing to be that person for my lieutenant, Inoue-san? Just to be clear, you aren't obliged to the Gotei 13, so please do not feel bad if you cannot accept my request. Oh, aye. Orihime looked down, and fidgeted with her fingers. Orihime knew that she really shouldn't accept, knowing what the Soul Society did to Ichigo's mother. However, even if Captain Unohana said to her that she shouldn't feel bad for refusing her request, just the thought of refusing to help the people who needed her, well, it made her feel extremely guilty. Retsu could easily see through the inner conflict Orihime was going through, so she closed her eyes and waited for the girl's response with a warm smile on her lips. Normally, she would be against this kind of blatant manipulation, but desperate times called for desperate measures. She was one of the original members of the Gotei 13 and also the last remaining member, now that Yamamoto had perished. If what she was doing now meant a better chance to win this war for the Gotei, then so be it. Protect the Soul Society, and destroy any enemies she would come across. That was all she cared, even if she lost her life while doing so. I'll do it, Orihime blurted out, a newfound resolve visible in her brown eyes. I mean, I want to help you, Unohana-san. You have my gratitude, Inoue-san. I know that it must have been a hard choice on your part, and for that, I am truly grateful. While I cannot promise it, I'll try to spare Kurosaki-san's life should the time comes. None of us truly wants to see Kurosaki-san dead, despite his actions today, said Retsu, being only half truthful. She couldn't say that she would have to kill Ichigo in front of the girl who chose to help them in her right conscience. But the part about none of them wanting to see Ichigo dead was indeed the truth, since the ones in the wrong were in truth the Gotei 13, so they really couldn't hold his actions against him. Oh, thank you. That's really a relief. Retsu turned around to hide her bitter smile, not at all proud of what she had done. She undid her braids, and made her hair flow down her back instead of her front, exposing the scar from the wound she received nearly 1,000 years ago. Her fingers trailed down her scar as she thought of the one man who had ever brought her the pleasure of battle, one that she could never hope to find again. How selfish of me. Inoue-san, pardon me, but I must get ready to leave. The royal guards will be arriving soon. If you have anything to ask, Azane will be more than happy to provide help. Okay, Orihime said, before letting out a gasp when she saw the scar. Do you want me to try to heal that scar, Unohana-san? I think I can heal it if I try. While I am grateful for the gesture, please, do save your strength for the more urgent patients, Inoue-san, replied Retsu. Even if I could heal the scar, how could I get rid of the only reminder I have that's left of him? Oh, yeah, we're here, we're finally here. The Zero Division is officially in the house. Boy, it sure has been a long time. How you hanging, you lil? Wait a sec, why's there only 1, 2, 3, 4, 6 of you guys? Questioned Kirinji Tenjira in confusion. The fanfare that was being played in the background abruptly came to a stop, as the black-haired beauty that stood behind Tenjira caught on the rather heavy atmosphere around the captains. There were only 6 captains present to greet the Zero Division. Captain Shia in Yoruichi of the 2nd Division, Captain A. Toribashi Ra of the 3rd Division, Captain Unohana Retsu of the 4th Division, Captain Hiroko Shinji of the 5th Division, Captain Komamura Sajin of the 7th Division, and Captain Yukitaki Shira of the 13th Division. 3 dead, and the rest are still struggling with their injuries, Kirinji-san. Huh, and what have you been doing, Unohana? Have you been even putting some use into those healing techniques I taught? Tenjiro stopped mid-sentence and blinked, as he noticed the 4th Division captain's hairdo along with the rather familiar gleam in her eyes. A sudden realization struck Tenjiro at that moment. He did not want to piss off the Kenpachi. You know what? Never mind. That's good to hear, Kirinji-san. As much as I'd like to exchange some pleasantries, the Gote is not in a good state as we speak. No leader to take control of the situation, massive casualties in nearly every division excluding the 4th and the 13th, not to mention the shortage of captain-level combatants as well as the complete loss of an entire division. If it were not for the Quincy's retreating for obvious reasons, the Gote 13 would have ceased to exist this day. Retsu explained their current situation in a somber tone, not at all proud of their state. Sure, the head captain's last order for the 4th Division was to stay in the 4th Division buildings no matter what, so she cannot be held responsible for anything. She wasn't even ready to wield her blade at that time, so it was truly meaningless to hold regrets over their past decisions. But that did not mean she wasn't ashamed of her inaction, despite being more than capable as a combatant, which was putting it quite mildly. At this point, she was the strongest captain left in the Gote 13 without a doubt. Ah, yes, I had expected this to be a joyful reunion, but it seems that the situation we are facing is much more complicated than I predicted it to be. First of all, the numbers of the available captains are way lower than my expectations. Secondly, you lot have already been defeated by Yhwach, not in the literal sense but your spirits. Only 2 of you still have that fire in your eyes, to fight till the end for the sake of protecting the Seraiti. Of course, one of you is too ill at the moment, which I suppose cannot be held against you, said a bald monk, the leader of the 0 Division Ichiba Hyasube. As much as I'd like to agree with that sentiment, Hyasube-sama. I'm Yhwach Shira started off, only to be stopped mid-sentence due to his illness-induced coughing. Now, take it easy, young one. I of all people know of your illness better than anyone, do I not? Said the monk with a wide smile. I suppose so. Yhwach Shira nodded with a faint smile, despite the pain he was suffering constantly. Good. Now, as you all probably know, or expected, we have come to offer our help in rebuilding the Gote 13. Well, if everything went as my expectations, that would have been enough, but sadly, it is not. So in the short time we have before Yhwach strikes once more, Tenjiro-kun here will help rejuvenate your injured. Tenjiro inclined his head while chewing a small wooden stick, causing everyone's eyes to focus on his outrageously large regent-style hair. Come to mama, kiddos. Aetsu here will be helping all of you with your zanjutsu. Well, except for you, Yakiru my dear. You are the only one who can rival him in zanjutsu, after all. Please, Hyasube-san. Do call me Retsu, as I have been going by that name for a long time. Retsu said with her usual warm, but scary smile, not that Ichiba was affected in any way by it. And I'm flattered to hear that. Meanwhile, Aetsu lifted his gold-framed sunglasses, and flashed a comically large grin that showed off all of his teeth. Yo, I'm number 1 Zanpakuta Krei Tor, not 10, or 9, or 8, or 7, or 6, or 5. Not even Sanmai. The name's Nimayao Etsu, and it's your pleasure to meet me. Quote. Is that guy serious? Shinji asked to Rose, who merely shook his head in response. Senjumaru-kun will be weaving you some new clothes that'll be more suitable for battle. The beautiful woman who had golden skeletal arms attached to her back gracefully bowed, and introduced herself. Origami Shutara Senjumaru, at your service. Now, last but definitely not the least, Kiryu-kun will be fixing up some food for you lot. Trust me, you'll love it. The rather plump purple-haired woman waved her hand. Hello, nice to meet you all, but then again, most of you already know me. Oh, and how good to see you again, Shinji. Is Hiyori-chan not with you today? Wait a minute, you're telling me, that you're the Kiryu-san I remember. You've certainly, changed, but that ain't the half of it. Are you even the same person? Shinji asked in disbelief. Rose nodded alongside him in agreement, while Yoruichi and Yashira seemed to be in shock as well. Retsu just kept on smiling warmly, which was more like a habit at this point of her life. Now, Shinji. Don't be silly, dear. I'm just the same as I always was. Oh dear, I'm famished. What about you, Hyasube-sama? Yashira asked. I'm afraid I'll have to head back to the Soul King Palace soon, young Yashira. While the other members of the Zero Division will be providing their help directly in protecting the Seraiti, one of us must defend the Soul King, as I know that Yhwach will be aiming to end his life without a doubt, said Ichigo, which brought out a nod of understanding from Yashira. Despite all the chaos ensuing around him, Komamura Sajin was unfazed with the whole situation, standing still with his eyes closed. His thoughts kept on drifting towards his fight with the young Quincy girl, who proved to be much more stronger than he expected. He barely stood any chance against the girl with his Bankai stolen from him, which prompted him to leave the battle when Genria Saidono had fallen. He would have to rectify his cowardice, and he knew the way. But was he willing to place his life for the sake of the Seraiti? Without a doubt, Shinji, Rose, and Yoruichi also had a lot of thoughts on their plate, which wasn't really in favor of the Gote 13 unlike Sajin's. What the Zero Division was providing could tip the war into the Gote 13's favor, but their heart was no longer into it. They wouldn't actually fight against the Gote 13 on the side of Yhwach, no, that was truly a despicable act. But they were no longer considering to fight for the Gote 13 either. What will be your choice, Kazuki? Thought Yoruichi. Cheer. The olive-skinned beauty raised her head when she heard the familiar voice, the only person who actually bothered to keep her company during her time being a captive of the Wandenreich. Ichigo. What brings you here today? That depends. I could be here to tell you that the Arankar Vanguard was officially disbanded, or I could be here to take advantage of your defenseless state, joked Ichigo. You've grown so much bolder than when we first met, Ichigo. If you're truly certain that you can handle myself along with your little harem, then you're more than welcome to do so, retorted Tear, causing Ichigo to blush in embarrassment. Oh, gods, no. My hands are already full as it is. A pity. You're the only man I'd ever consider of taking as a mate, joked Tear, not that her impassive expression showed any signs of her doing just that. Still, Ichigo was rather good at reading people with stoic expressions due to Jugram and Kang, so he did catch the joke. I'm flattered and all, but let's get down to business. I want you to return to Hawako Mundo, and take your place as the Queen of Hawako Mundo again, said Ichigo in a serious tone. Cheer couldn't move her body with still being bound in chains and all, so she settled for staring up at Ichigo in confusion. And what's the catch? After this war between us Quincy and the Shinigami is over, you sign a peace treaty with us. We can negotiate the terms later on, but I promise that it will be fair to both sides. Cheer pondered her options, on whether she would place her trust on the orange-haired Quincy in front of him. She didn't doubt his sway in the Wandenreich, being the successor to the throne and all. She trusted his character, too. I accept. Her answer brought out a satisfied smirk on Ichigo's part, and he quickly released the former Espada from her shackles. Cheer nearly collapsed as she was finally able to stand properly on her feet for the first time in a few months, but it didn't take long for her to get used to her restored freedom. Her eyebrows rose when she heard the opening of a garganta, and sent a questioning gaze at Ichigo. Yes, I can open a garganta, if you're asking about that. I'll seek you out when the war's over. Oh, and for all it's worth, I'm sorry that you had to go through all this. What Ichigo didn't expect was for Tear to chuckle in response. You truly are an admirable man, Ichigo. I do not need your apology, for the things you did for me while I was a lowly captive here is more than enough. Actions speak louder than words, after all. Cheer said, and she gently grabbed Ichigo's face, before planting a firm chaste kiss on his lips. If you change your mind, all you need to do is ask. Goodbye, Ichigo. I hope to see you again soon. Even after Tear left through the garganta, Ichigo couldn't help but to wonder what in the hell had just happened. Tear wasn't joking when she admitted him to be the only man she'd consider as a potential mate. Still, 4 was more than enough trouble in his hands. Official message. Unohana Kenpachi Yakiru. The above individual is hereby appointed to the positions of head captain of the Gote 13 and captain of the 1st Division. I had expected them to leave the seat in absence, rather than to name a person such as myself as the head captain. Captain, is something wrong? Azane asked, worried for her captain. Something has come up. Azane, said Unohana Retsu. No, Yakiru. She passed on the letter to Azane, and brushed the handle of her Zanpakuta. Is this for real, Captain? Azane said after letting out a gasp while reading the letter, and looked down when she saw her captain nodding in confirmation. Oh, I see. Azane, we all have a time when we must say our goodbyes. When you're given that chance, we must take it as a blessing. Now, promise me that you'll take good care of my division even in my absence, Yakiru said softly. I will, Captain. I won't disappoint. Yakiru raised her hand and wiped a few tear drops that had started to trail down Azane's cheeks. She knew that she'd be expected to fight once more with their current situation, and she was more than ready, eager to comply. But even she did not foresee this happening. Head Captain Unohana Kenpachi Yakiru. I'll probably be remembered as either the person who served the shortest period as the head captain, or the last head captain of the Gote 13. A red-haired Shinigami woke up, only to find himself in a freezing cold cell, which oddly looked like a torture chamber. He could see the blood stains, indicating that it hadn't been that long since this place was last used. Where the hell am I? Oh, shit, Renji muttered as his memories before he lost his consciousness came back to him. Shit indeed for you, Abarai Renji, drawled a cold voice, causing Renji's head to snap towards him. Ichigo, it's not so good to see you, Abarai. I really had so many things planned for you, to make you feel the exact same feelings I had to experience when I learned everything my mom went through. But now that I have you in front of me, I can barely remember any of those, and I just want to kill you so badly. As much as I'd like to say otherwise, I would do the exact same thing I did that day. I'm sorry for what I did to you, Ichigo, but I won't say that I'm sorry for letting a Quincy die to a hollow, Renji admitted truthfully, knowing that he was dead the moment he was captured by the enemy. That's good to know, Abarai. At least I won't feel guilty for doing the things I had planned to do to you. When Ichigo had his revenge on Tsukishima, it was so sweet, almost to the point of being intoxicating. This time, it was oddly bittersweet. Chapter 12. The Calm Before the Storm. Ichi-chan, not there, you perv. That was the first thing Ichigo heard when he woke up in the early morning. The morning sun shone its light through the only window in his personal quarters, not that it felt warm by any means. The Wandenreich resided in a pocket dimension that was constructed in the shadows of the Seraiti, which somewhat expanded to the shadows of all 3 realms over time. While the sun actually did shine even in the shadows, it didn't feel warm since the realm of shadows was on the negative plane, while the sun existed on the positive one. It was like a one-way mirror if Ichigo tried to explain it, where they could observe the realm outside of the shadows while the other side would only see the surface of the shadow. No. Don't, stoop. Bad Bambi. Ichigo let out a low chuckle when he heard the content of the sleeping girl's moans. Whatever she was dreaming of, her sleep-talking was acting quite self-explanatory. Regardless of her own opinions of herself, Giselle Gewel was a fairly lovely girl in Ichigo's eyes. Her build was quite slender in an adorable way, and despite her small frame the lines of her legs never failed to amaze him, only to be amplified with her preference of wearing black leggings most of the time. The line that started from her hips leading to her upper body was way better without her uniform, although her breasts were. Ichigo stopped that thought from going any further. There was a reason Giselle was quite jealous of Candace, Menina's and even Bambietta in that department. Giselle was always self-conscious about her appearance before, and even after they started their romantic relationship with all his reassurances that she was more than beautiful enough to his own eyes. She had a rather low opinion on her own beauty, and Ichigo really couldn't blame her. Being friends with Candace, Menina's, and Bambietta really didn't do any good for her self-esteem in that part, which was a reason Ichigo went out of his way to always show his love for Giselle. He really wasn't blind enough to consider her insistence of being the girl he had chosen as his first over Candace and Menina's as her honest thought. Ichigo loved nearly everything, quite obviously, about Giselle. He really did, but what he loved the most about her ever since they first met was her breathtakingly beautiful cerulean eyes. Considering everything she went through and what she did, her eyes shone rather brightly like a well-polished gem. With a fair amount of exaggeration, Ichigo could stare into her eyes for hours and never get bored of it. Her sharp, but cute nose and her lovable lips, especially when she stuck out her lips with her pouty look, were some of the other traits he found Giselle to be both endearing and attractive at the same time. Ichigo could feel a faint smile tugging on his lips when he noticed the way Giselle tried to snuggle into his side in her sleep, and wrapped his arm around her petite frame while running his hand down her black silky hair. She was just too adorable for him to not show such affection when she was acting all clingy, even in her sleep, and his thoughts wandered to the night of that day when they first met. He was rather overwhelmed with everything that was thrown at him on that very day, with the revelation of his heritage as a Quincy from his mother's side, as well as the whole history between the Quincy and Shinigami. Of course, his budding infatuation with the girl with mesmerizing blue eyes was another. Ichigo had accepted the offer to join the Wandenreich under one condition, and everything was history. That day when he arrived at Giselle's personal quarters, he still didn't like to visit her quarters unless it was absolutely necessary. He had learned something unpleasant, something that would have freaked him out if it was before the whole Tsukishima ordeal. The vials of her own blood she kept in her quarters could have served as a big obstacle to the future relationship of himself and Giselle, but he didn't allow it to happen. Ichigo patiently waited until hearing Giselle's full story before making any kind of judgment, and it was truly a good choice on his part. About those vials, they're filled with my own blood, Ichi-chan. Giselle struggled to find the word, and Ichigo knew that this couldn't be any easy for her, so he didn't press her for the answers. Complicated, I guess. Each of us Sternritter have our own Schrift, a power His Majesty granted to us. My letter I hold as a Sternritter is Z, and my epithet is the zombie. The zombie? Asked Ichigo. MMHMM. If a non-Quincy being is exposed to my blood, that being falls under my control as a zombie, a puppet that can be ordered around at my whim, which is basically the reason I have those vials stored to use if I need them. It doesn't matter if they're alive or dead, but if I were to use it on another Quincy, that Quincy must be dead in order for my Schrift to work. That's kinda creepy, if I'm going to be blunt about it, Ichigo admitted with an unreadable expression on his face. So this Schrift His Majesty bestowed to you guys, is it completely random, or something His Majesty decided beforehand? To be honest, Ichigo had a hard time believing that the Emperor could just give out such powerful abilities to his subordinates. How was that even possible? That sounded like something almost godlike. I've never asked about it, but it isn't random, and I don't think His Majesty chose what it would be. But I think he knows just about enough to give us a letter that matches our abilities perfectly. You see, I'm pretty sure that my Schrift came from my deepest desires. Giselle muttered, looking down at her hands that were resting on her thigh. No, in truth, they weren't resting at all. Ichigo noticed the way her nails were digging into her thigh, and sighed. Despite how much everything he had heard up until this point was screaming at him to stay away from this girl, he just couldn't. Something was telling him that all she needed was someone to support her, to be on her side no matter what. Giselle flinched immediately when Ichigo's hand reached for her own with a sigh, and tried to pull her hands away, only to find herself unable to free her hands from his strong grip. Her eyes shot up in surprise, and met the warm caring brown of the boy's eyes. She couldn't understand just how they were so full of compassion. How was he able to still look at her like that with all he had just heard? He should be disgusted with her, not giving her an indifferent look, or an even more understanding one. Tell me, Gigi, what were his deepest desires that led you to think like that? I want to understand you. He wants to understand me, thought Giselle in shock. No one had ever tried to understand her once they learned or saw the extent of her Schrift, but Ichigo was willing to. Those 5 words he spoke to her, she couldn't help but to break down. He wants to understand me. But I don't deserve his understanding. Ichigo shut his eyes in frustration when Giselle adamantly shook her head for some reason, and released his grip on her hands. The black-haired girl froze when he let go of her hands, thinking that he would be leaving her too. She couldn't help but to release a gasp when Ichigo wrapped his arms around her, and pulled her into his embrace. She wanted to protest that she was undeserving of this warmth, the kindness that radiated from Ichigo, but she just couldn't. Giselle felt so selfish, but she wished nothing more but to bask in his presence forever. I've always wanted to protect people that are precious to me, you know. My friends, my family. One day when I was a kid, I learned from my old man that my name means, to protect one thing. At that time, my mom meant the whole world to me. She was basically the center of my small world, and I could always rely on her. She never failed to make me smile when she wanted to, not even once. I used to smile a lot back then. Ichigo smiled as he thought back to the old fond memories of his childhood. Giselle buried her head into his chest as she listened to Ichigo talk about his past. She could tell from just hearing his voice, that every single word of his were genuine, and that he had loved his mother dearly. So when I heard the meaning of my name, I decided then and there to protect my mom, to live up to my name. It then became a desire to protect my family, my sisters. Even my only childhood friend. I wanted to protect everyone close to me, and even some that weren't. And then it happened, said Ichigo, unknowingly tightening his embrace around Giselle. The girl knew what was coming next. How couldn't she? I know the truth now, but even until 2 years ago, I believed it to be my fault that my mom died that day. I vowed to protect my mom, but I thought of myself as the very person who caused her death. A fucking failure. At this point, Ichigo had to take in a deep breath. The topic about his mother was really hard to bring up, especially today. But he wanted to do this, to share it with Giselle. He didn't know the exact reason, but he just felt like he had to do this. I felt lost. A sunflower always follows the sun during the day, you know. My mom was the radiant sun in not only my life, but my entire family's. How could I not feel lost, without the very sun to guide me anymore? My sisters were too young back then, but even they felt her absence in their lives. My dad, he really loved my mom. Even while he tried to fill up that sudden gaping hole that formed in our lives, he was suffering badly too. He never blamed me, but I couldn't stop from placing all the guilt on myself, to feel responsible for all the emptiness and sorrow in my family. I visited the place where I last saw her smile on a daily basis after her death, the very riverbank we met today. It lessened from every day to 3 times a week, twice, once, and then every 2 weeks, a month, but I could never stop myself from going there on a day when I needed her comfort more than anything. My deepest desire, Giselle, is to just see her smile at me like she always did, just once more. For her to tell me that she's proud of me, but it wasn't her that I found comfort from today, Ichigo thought to himself, although he wasn't able to work up the courage to tell her this. That was just too embarrassing. Giselle realized that Ichigo had started to cry at some point during his tale. She knew that it wouldn't have been easy for him to share all of this with her, and she raised her head to say something, when Ichigo started to speak once more. I want to help you, Gigi. I really do. But to do that, I need to know more about you before I make my decision, before I make up my mind. So will you please tell me about yours? It took everything in her to remind herself to breathe at that moment, when she saw the watery smile on his face. It was so breathtakingly beautiful and full of warmth, that just by seeing such an expression on his face made her want to spill out every last part of her heart, like a sinner confessing every single wrongdoing they committed to a priest. It felt like a sin in itself to not tell him anything after seeing his smile. She trailed off with a prominent blush spreading all over her cheeks. How could she say no to that? Okay. The way his expression brightened up a little, caused her heart to beat faster. My mom died when I was a baby. Apparently her body wasn't healthy enough to cope with childbirth, but she still went on with it. My father hated me for it, and blamed me for her death. He didn't abuse me for it, but the hatred was always there, and it hurt me, a lot. Nothing significant happened, up until I became 10. Ichigo quickly reached for her hand, and rubbed the back of it with his thumb. He thought that she could use his support for this, and Giselle rather appreciated the gesture. Then I met 2 friends, the first I ever had in my life. Estelle and Jean, 2 Gemist Quincy who ran away from their abusive homes. And I don't really want to talk about them, said Giselle, but she immediately took a deep breath before continuing, encouraged by Ichigo's soothing gesture. It was a forbidden friendship for me, kind of. I was the heiress to the Gewell family, and they were lowly commoners, to my father's eyes. I knew that nothing good would come out of me being seen with them, but I didn't want my first friendship to end because of it. So our friendship continued to exist on thin ice for a whole year, before my father found out about everything. I never expected him to take that long to find out, if I'm being honest about it. That was the first time my father actually hurt me physically, and he ordered me to stop with my foolishness. Do you want to know what I did? Ichigo knew that Giselle wasn't actually asking for an answer from him, but he still gave her an audible response to encourage her. I do, he replied softly. I ran away with them, as far as a few kids could go before we got caught. My father killed them right in front of my eyes, and he was about to hurt me again. He wouldn't kill his only child, the only heiress that could carry the family name. But he was more than ready to hurt me, so that he could mold me into the perfect heiress he had in his mind. And I met him that day, Ichi-chan. Jugram was there. At this point Ichigo's brows rose in surprise, but he kept on listening with patience. Jugram brought me and my father in front of His Majesty, my father bound in chains while he held my hand. His Majesty was not at all happy with him, and I ended up inheriting everything that belonged to my father that day. But what surprised me the most was that His Majesty called me my daughter, and I could tell from the look in his eyes that he considered me as more of his own child than my father ever did. That's what led me to make the decision to become a Sternritter. His Majesty really does care about all of us then, huh? Yeah, he's more of a father than my birth father could ever be to me. A few years later I became a Sternritter somehow, even if my prowess as a Quincy wasn't enough to become one. And I was bestowed my Schrift, the zombie. The reason why it has anything to do with my deepest desire is quite simple. I didn't want to see anyone I care about to die and leave me, never again. That's why I think my Schrift is capable of making dead people into a zombie. That does kind of make sense, said Ichigo, before shaking his head. If that's true, then your Schrift itself won't be enough to make me think any less. He stopped in the middle of his words, when he saw the sad look Giselle was showing him. As much as it warms my heart to hear that, you have more than enough reasons to keep your distance from me, Ichi-chan. My head's kind of messed up. I really enjoy inflicting pain on other people, and equally enjoy my own pain too. I never wanted to learn something like that, but it happened. Did you know that I'm obsessed with seeing one of my friends, Bambi-chan, to beg for my blood on her knees one day? My subconscious back then must have had a hand in my Schrift, the ability to control people at my whim. Can you look at me indifferently, now that you've heard everything? I started Ichigo, only to close his mouth immediately. I thought so too. Sorry for bothering you. Just don't be a stranger, okay? Said Giselle, a sad smile adorning her face. She tried to get up and leave, only for Ichigo to stop her by grabbing onto her wrist. Wait, I didn't say no yet, you know. I'll think about it tonight, and give you an answer tomorrow. And he did give her an answer the next morning. Now, he really couldn't imagine a life without Giselle. A penny for your thoughts. A smile crept onto his lips when he heard his girlfriend's voice, who was looking up at him with an affectionate gaze. He leant down and placed a kiss on her brow, and replied with a chuckle. I'm Japanese, Giselle. The term penny doesn't fit that well for me. And it does for me, she said with a questioning look. It's just a saying, and if you got the meaning, then it served its purpose well enough. Fair point, I guess, Ichigo replied with a nod. Did you sleep well? Yup, not as well as usual, but I had this dream, and it was. The way Giselle moaned as she thought of her naughty dream made Ichigo roll his eyes with a small tug on the edge of his lips. And did your dream threesome with Bambi turn you on that much? Warning. Lemon. So you heard it all, huh? Murmured Giselle, only for her eyes to lit up with mischievousness. Her eyes quickly traveled downwards, and spotted the noticeably large bulge that was visible on her lover's pants. Well, did my sleep talking turn you on that much? That's like the 5th time you said that to me, Ichigo replied nonchalantly, obviously used to Giselle's teasing after all those sexual experiences he shared with her. You should come up with something new. Maybe. So, I can see that you are as healthy as always, Ichi-chan, said Giselle while giggling, her hand snaking its way down into his pants. You're insatiable, Gigi, Ichigo muttered. I didn't sign up for such a naughty girl when I asked you out. Well, you got what you deserved, you perv. Weren't the three of us enough for you, so that you had to go for Bambi-chan too? Teased Giselle with a giggle as her fingers wrapped around his hardened erect manhood. In my defense, I didn't go for her, he said, and released a groan when Giselle squeezed his penis. I know that, silly. And honestly, all of us knew that it was bound to happen sooner or later. I'm actually surprised that it took this long. Just as Giselle's soft fingers started to stroke his stiff member, she also stuck out her tongue and licked one of his nipples, sending shivers of pleasure down his spine. Her other hand made its way down to her pussy, which was already soaked from the pleasant dream she had earlier. She wasn't wearing her sleepwear, or even her underwear for that matter. No wearing any kind of clothing when they're sharing a bed. It was a policy the girls shared, and it's not like Ichigo was going to complain about it. Sure, he still got flustered when he saw them in their birthday suit, but it was more out of endearment rather than embarrassment. He wouldn't perv on a random girl's naked body, that much she knew. The only reason he was wearing his pants was the fact that he went to sleep alone, and Giselle had snuck in during his sleep. Gigi, Ichigo murmured, and pulled her body over his. Her fingers did feel good on his throbbing penis, but only one of her hands weren't enough to even wrap around it properly, so he decided to move on quickly. Besides, he knew that the squirming girl would appreciate him being a bit forceful. Giselle let out a yelp when she was pulled up, but quickly straddled his lap and placed her hands on Ichigo's shoulders. Her hair cascaded down and tickled his cheek, so Ichigo tidied her hair into a ponytail and pulled her down roughly by tugging on it. You're going to be the death of me someday. Ichigo then roughly captured her lips before she could even come up with a reply, and it soon evolved into a full-blown make-out session. He took no time in forcefully claiming Giselle's mouth with his tongue, and she was more than happy to return the kiss with equal fervor. Her hand snaked up to Ichigo's long orange hair, and tangled itself with it. It wasn't to say that the kiss was the best kiss they shared recently or something like that. A morning make-out session could never be the best experience of kissing, but Giselle didn't care. What really turned her on was the way Ichigo forcefully took her lips for a kiss, and dominated her mouth like he owned it. Wait, he did own it. She let out a moan into his mouth when his hand that didn't have her hair in its grasp traveled downwards, and groped her ample ass for a few seconds before spanking it lightly. Giselle hungrily pushed Ichigo's tongue back into his own mouth and started her own invasion, even as the spanking became more hard and rough. She was as much of a masochist as a sadist, but she didn't want to hurt Ichigo in any way. So she begged Ichigo to treat her roughly when they were having sex, and while it took a lot of effort on his part, he was able to satisfy her needs to some extent. Ichigo's hand stopped spanking her ass, and moved on to her soaking wet snatch which Giselle was grinding against his now creamed cock. He then played with her pussy lips for a few seconds before plunging 2 fingers into her core, which caused her to break the kiss and release a long sensual moan as she buried her face into the crook of his neck. You just love this, don't you? You naughty girl, always so hungry for my cock, eager to be punished for your slutty behavior. Well, do you have anything to say for yourself? Ichigo growled into her ear, as he started to roughly pump his fingers in and out of her tight pussy. He could feel the way she spilled more and more of her love juice and cream, all from just having 2 of his fingers defiling her lower lips. And no, it feels so good. Mess up my naughty cunt harder, Ichi-chan. Make me come with those fingers, and ooh. Giselle let out a squeal and bit on Ichigo's shoulders when he added a 3rd digit to the rough fingering, and her tight walls squeezed his fingers as she reached her peak. Ichigo let go of his grip on her hair, and ran his hand down her back until she recovered from her orgasm. Ha, it's no wonder you eagerly brought Bambi-chan into our relationship. I bet you can knock all 4 of us out in a full-out orgy, or up. Giselle said while giggling, receiving an indignant huff from Ichigo. No matter how many times he argued that it wasn't him who initiated anything, she just shrugged it off and teased him again. Noticing her lover's souring mood, Giselle leaned in for a quick kiss before she wiggled her hips and whispered, "Your cock is drooling with your pre-cum. Are you that eager to fuck me, silly? Do you want to pound into your slut of a girlfriend's pussy with your big fat cock?" Giselle couldn't suppress herself from cooing when she noticed the lustful gleam in his eyes. "I bet you wanna do that, Ichi-chan. But can you really do it though? Can you really fuck your naughty slut into submission?" Despite saying all that, Giselle wasn't prepared at all for what Ichigo did after hearing her talk dirty. Before she even realized it, she found herself lying on her back, her arms pinned over her head. She couldn't help but to quiver in anticipation when her eyes met with Ichigo's, which had a tinge of gold mixed with brown instead of his usual warm brown color. It was fairly obvious to her that she had succeeded in pushing him into a mood for a very rough sex. One that just might be the best fuck of her life, or the first of many to come. "I sincerely hope that you don't have any plans for today, Gigi," growled Ichigo, not only further arousing Giselle, but actually bringing out a small orgasm from her. Ichigo's tongue darted out and licked his lower lip in equal anticipation as his girlfriend, when he noticed her reddened cheeks and the way she looked up at him with a submissive gaze. "I'm gonna make sure that you won't be able to walk out of this bed, with all the spanking and pounding I give you. Is that what you want, my beautiful little slut?" Giselle cracked, even with all the sexual tension between them. "Oh, God, Ichi-chan. You really suck at this. All you needed to do was to say my little slut without the compliment," she said while giggling. "Hey, I tried my best. I just can't help it when I see your eyes, okay?" Ichigo scowled indignantly. Giselle looked away in embarrassment upon hearing his honest words, even though she wasn't able to stop the giggling. Her boyfriend really had his way of throwing in such blunt compliments when she least expected it. It was one of his most endearing traits. "I suppose I ruined the mood, didn't I?" he muttered while rolling his eyes, and let go of his hold on Giselle's arms. Wait, I'm sorry," Giselle said hurriedly, and locked her legs around Ichigo's waist. She then stuck out her lower lip and gave him a pouty look, her lips quivering in an overly dramatic way. "Please." Both of them knew that he could never resist her with that look on her, and Ichigo also knew that she loved it when he fell for her pout. But this time, Ichigo had to hide a smirk from forming while letting out a huff. It's not like he was really going to turn his back on this. As much as Giselle was turned on with the whole foreplay, he was equally aroused as well with the way she kept on rubbing her pussy lips on his cock. He wanted to nothing more than to lower his hips just a little and thrust forward, staking claim on her as his, but he decided against it for the sole purpose of indulging Giselle's fetish. "Please what?" said Ichigo, knowing that at least this part wouldn't be that hard for him. It wasn't that hard to go along with Giselle's love of submissive sex as long as they were in the real game, but it didn't come that easy to him during their foreplay. This one though, all he needed to do was keep on pressing her with a question. "Please, I promise that I'll be a good girl," whined Giselle, enjoying her situation immensely. "Not until you tell me exactly what you really want, you naughty minx," he said while slowly and sensually moving his hips to grind his dick against her flooding pussy. The erotic squelching sound along with the aroused breath of the cute girl underneath him served to further arouse him, but he had more than enough patience to wait until Giselle was satisfied. "No, you're too cruel, Ichi-chan," she moaned, her now free hands clinging onto Ichigo's shoulders. "Are you gonna tell me what you really want, or what?" asked Ichigo, receiving a low incoherent mumble as a reply. He pinched Giselle's nipple and twisted it, which brought out a gasp from her. "I can't hear you, Gigi." Ichigo could literally hear her breath getting more ragged with each passing second, and the way her eyes became more clouded with desire did not go unnoticed either. He lowered his other hand to cup her cheek, and she leaned into it like a little kitten, a bit too perverted to be called innocent, though. "I want you to stick your fat cock into my slutty cunt. Fuck me silly, and use me like your personal cum dumpster," she begged, and Ichigo knew that the girl meant every last word, despite the whole thing being a part of their lovemaking. Not in the usual sense of making love, but the amount of love they shared beneath the act itself was no less than the steamy lovemaking he would have with Menina's, so he thought that it would be weird for him to say otherwise. It was just the way the love life between him and Giselle went, with a fair amount of effort on his part. He found it a bit too hard for him to treat her roughly, so it was rather difficult for him to get immersed in the act, but Ichigo still tried his best. Giselle also knew just how much he put his effort into satisfying this fetish of hers, so she was immensely grateful for it and never pushed him for anything. She just let Ichigo choose his pace, and stuck to encouraging him with her dirty talking. What if I don't want to? Teased Ichigo, but his actions told her otherwise. Ichigo's throbbing cock was eager to claim her inner walls and conquer the entirety of it, evident from the way the tip of his head was placed against her entrance. So Giselle said the only thing that came to her mind at that moment. Just go ahead and fuck me, breed me like the whore I am. Please. She didn't get the chance to finish her line. As you wish, whispered Ichigo, and his entire length penetrated her warm and tight walls right until the tip of it slammed into the entrance of her womb. And she couldn't help but to love the sensation. She loved it when the tip of Ichigo's monstrous penis slammed into her cervix. It gave her a hell lot of pleasure and pain at the same time, but the pain was another form of pleasure to her. How could she not love it? There was a reason she begged Ichigo to fuck her like a beast when she lost her virginity, after all. Ah! Giselle let out a wanton moan at the rough penetration, nearly reaching her climax thanks to all the foreplay. Her eyes widened for a short second before her eyelids drooped down, cooing and moaning each time Ichigo's thick member pulled out while dragging out her walls along as they clung to it, and claimed its place again with a powerful thrust. Ooh! I love it, Ichi. Fuck me harder, faster. Ichigo had to admit that he loved the sight of Giselle squirming underneath him in pleasure. He needed her small, but soft and firm breasts with both of his hands while suckling on her neck, which would leave a visible hickey without a doubt. Hell, he intended to leave a few more before they left the bed if he had his way. Do you like my pussy? I bet you love my pussy, you hopeless pervert, cooed Giselle, getting more turned on herself through all the shameless dirty talk, just enough to reach her second orgasm of the day. HGGHH. Oh, God, I'm gonna cum. Hiya, cummy ENG. Despite the way his lower body was being drenched with all the cum Giselle was squirting, Ichigo didn't lower the pace of his thrusts. The rhythmical slapping sounds of their flesh mixed with the moans of the lovely girl beneath him sounded heavenly to his ears. He changed his position into one he would take when doing push-ups, and kept on pounding into Giselle's snatch with more vigor. The poor girl couldn't help but to squirm and squeal from his continued penetration, which completely disregarded her recent orgasm. Each thrust reached a different spot after the change of his position, and Giselle could feel another climax approaching rapidly. Who's the real hopeless pervert here, miss? I already came 2 times. Teased Ichigo. No, it's 3. She squealed, and her inner walls constricted his cock from the orgasm, trying its best to milk his semen out of it. Ichigo could have tried to hold it longer. No, he definitely could have held on longer. But he was already pent up from all the teasing as it is, so he just sped up his pace for the benefit of them both. This kind of rough pounding was more than enough to cause unpleasant pain to the woman and make her sore afterwards. But this girl wasn't an ordinary woman, but the one and only Giselle, and she was loving each and every single second of it. Tell me, my little slut, where do you want me to come? He asked, and clamped his hand against her mouth when she tried to answer the question. No, wait, you said so yourself that you want me to use you as my personal cum dumpster, if I remember correctly. Isn't that right, Gigi? Even with all the pleasure and pain overwhelming her senses, Giselle was more than capable of giving her answer. Her eyes curved into a lustful eye smile, while her tongue poked out of her lips in order to lick his palm in an erotic way. Ichigo took that as a yes. He could sense his own climax approaching, but he didn't pull out. He was going to fill up her womb to the brim with his thick potent semen, which would undoubtedly impregnate her. His ball sacks kept on slapping against her ass, which ached a bit, but that wasn't enough to stop his race to fuck her brains out. Giselle could feel her lover's upcoming climax, just from the way his breath became heavier with each passing moment. Her moans and squeals were muffled against his palm, but her eye smile did the trick for her to further encourage him. Her own orgasm wasn't all that far either, though. When Ichigo removed his hand and hungrily claimed her lips for a deep passionate kiss, she couldn't help but to fall in love with him some more, if it was even possible. She could literally feel his love for her from the gesture, which was so sweet of him. In truth, She would be able to live without her fetish being satisfied, but she really couldn't imagine a life without his love. She also knew that he was about to come, and she knew that she was going to love it. With one last mighty slap, Ichigo's throbbing dick started to shoot rope after rope of his thick sticky semen straight into Giselle's womb. It was the last 10th rope that brought out her own orgasm, albeit short but a powerful one. She was soon enamored with the loving passionate kiss they shared during and after their respective orgasms, and the contentment that came with all of her lover's cum filling her womb only served to increase the passion on her part. She tangled her hand with Ichigo's hair, not wanting to let him go just yet. They kept on holding each other while continuing to exchange some more kisses until Giselle released her grasp, so that Ichigo could roll to the side and lay on his back. Giselle quickly latched onto him and trailed her finger on his chest, while placing her head on his upper arm. She stared at her rather handsome lover for a few seconds before starting to giggle. She really couldn't help it, and Ichigo's confused expression only made her giggles increase in volume. "You were the best, Ichi-chan," she gushed before Ichigo could misinterpret her giggles. "That was the best sex we've had so far. You were really into it at the end, weren't you?" "I suppose," Ichigo muttered as he scratched the back of his head. To think of it, he probably did satisfy her needs fairly well today. He wasn't going to delve into hardcore SM plays or something like that, but today wasn't that bad. Exciting, but not overly so. "I think I can go with something like this with some light spanking, but I'm definitely not gonna choke you or hit you for this fetish of yours." "I wasn't going to even ask anyway." Giselle deadpanned, knowing what she could and shouldn't ask. "You're too soft to act that violent against any of us. But what do you think about bondage?" Ichigo blankly stared at the girl as if to ask, "Are you fucking serious?" Through his gaze, but soon shook his head with a small grin tugging on his lips. "I'll consider it, if that's what you really want." "Okay," she chirped happily, and then asked an innocent question. "By the way, Ichi-chan, I did ask you to use me as your personal cum dumpster, but did you even think of the possibility of getting me knocked up when you came inside?" "Please, Gigi, didn't I answer this some time ago? Besides, you said so yourself that you take pills." "But what if I don't?" she asked again, even though she caved into Ichigo's rather stern look. Okay, sorry." This wasn't exactly the first time she had came up with the topic. While it was him who had brought up the matter of their future in the first place, it was for the purpose of complimenting the change in her personality, not to discuss any real details. He had gotten extremely flustered back then, when Giselle innocently asked him a question about pregnancy, and it still did to some degree. "As I said the last time, if you somehow get pregnant even with using protection, I promise that I'll be with you from the start until the end," he answered sincerely, which resulted in a brilliant smile forming on Giselle's face, and not her usual dopey one. Ichigo loved the smile, since it felt a lot more genuine than her usual way of smiling. "But seriously, while I do want a child of our own someday, I don't really want that to happen when I haven't reached 20 yet, or even in my early 20s. I know, I just wanted to hear it again. You don't know how much it means for me to hear that, to know that you'll always be there for a girl like me," said Giselle, keeping the last part to herself. Ichigo hummed in content for a few seconds before placing a gentle kiss on the tip of her nose. To be honest, he did know how much his words meant for her. He wasn't as clueless as he used to be with constantly having to deal with 3 girlfriends and 1 girl with an explosive temper. Well, now it was 4 girlfriends. Goat-chin always called Rukia as his 3rd daughter. I wonder how he'll react when he suddenly has 4 more daughters. No, scratch that, I don't want to really imagine anything about it. Single quote, Ichigo thought to himself, but his lips quirked into an unknowing smile at the thought. Gigi would probably get along with him well, and many would just smile warmly through all of his stupid acts, although she just might punch him if he really annoys her. Candace would probably stay the hell away from him, not that Goat-chin would let her. I bet that Bambi would blow everything up if she has to spend even a minute in the same room as him. "Hey, Ichi-chan, yeah, I'm sticky." He couldn't help but to roll his eyes at that comment. "We just had sex. I wanna take a shower." Ichigo was about to say either go ahead or carry her to the shower himself, before he remembered his earlier words. He did say that he'll make sure of her being unable to walk out of his bed, didn't he? He was a man of promise. No, Ichigo said as he pulled her up on his lap while sitting up himself, and gave her an expectant look. I told you, you're not walking out of this bed on your own today. Oh, said Giselle, before replying with a sly grin. Then what are you waiting for? Lemon end. It was well past noon when Ichigo finally tidied up himself and left his room. While Giselle was dozing off in his bed, he made sure that everything was cleaned up so she would be comfortable. He didn't want her to wake up in a bed that reeked of sex, while she herself was covered with all sorts of fluids, so he also made sure to help her take a shower, after another round. Ichigo quickly made his way to the mess hall for a rather late lunch, as well as taking some of it for Giselle to eat when she woke up. He received salutes from the few soldats he came across on his way, and he could see that the respect they held for him had increased after the invasion. It was fairly obvious to him that the word of him being the one to take down the head captain had spread all over the Wandenreich. If some of the Quincy had their doubts about the Emperor's chosen successor, it would have been gone as soon as the word got out. It's not like he really cared about what others thought about him. He used to say that about his appearance a few years back, but he honestly did care at that time, though. What really mattered to him now was the opinion of his friends, lovers and family. Family. He would be visiting his family soon. He had held himself back from meeting his sisters, but the cat was already out of the bag at this point. What reason was there for him to delay it any longer? The possibility of attracting needless attention from the Soul Society. It's not like they didn't know the existence of his family, and the fact that their father was the former Captain Shiba. It was highly unlikely that the Soul Society could even pull something off with their current numbers of captain-level combatants, and him being there would only further secure their safety. They should be busy coping with the high casualties they suffered, while preparing for the inevitable second invasion. Hello, Mr. Kurosaki. I see that you've gotten even stronger than before. Even imagining myself to be on your level of power seems somewhat surreal, commented a childish voice. Sternritter Thumo, Ichigo said as he turned towards the source of the voice. You give me too much credit. It makes me feel like a monster if you say something like that. Sternritter, the Gremmy Thumo held the shrift, the visionary, which allowed him to turn his imaginations into reality. He could be easily counted as one of the strongest Sternritter, if not the strongest until Ichigo came into the picture. While he had the appearance of a child with messy blonde hair being shorter than even Liltato and all, Ichigo knew that it could easily be a fake appearance with his power over imagination. Then again, he did still have a somewhat childlike personality, so. The Visionary was one of the most ridiculous shrifts excluding the Almighty, on the same level of his own, the Amnesia, or Gerard's, the Miracle, in Ichigo's opinion. Many of the Sternritter's shrifts were quite ridiculous themselves, with the likes of the Balance, the Compulsory, the Death-dealing, and such. But the shrifts that those on the level of the Schutzstaffel had under their control was a bit over the top. Aren't we all one, though? Gremmy asked in amusement, before stretching out a hand. Ichigo stared at the empty hand in confusion, until a round chocolate cookie suddenly appeared out of nowhere. Liltato gave me one of these to satisfy my curiosity, and I have taken a liking to the flavor of it. I'd like to share the experience, so I've been wandering around to share it with others. Well, Ichigo said as he stared at the cookie warily, before hesitantly taking it. It's not like he was expecting the boy to poison him with the cookie, though. That was more like something Askin just might do, just for the purpose of examining the expression on his face when he did. Ichigo wasn't sure if it was edible or not, but given the mentioning of Liltato's name, it couldn't be all that bad. Besides, given one of the limits of Gremmy's shrift, it probably won't even last long enough in his stomach to be properly digested. Thanks. So, you haven't tried out something like this before? She recommended it to you. And when you say, something like this, I'm not sure if I understand, Gremmy said with confusion evident in his voice. Oh, I mean, well, just about everything that Liltato might like, I guess. Desserts, beverages, snacks. Ichigo explained as he took a bite from the cookie. Honestly, it wasn't all that special. Just a flavor that an ordinary chocolate cookie might have. It's not bad. Yeah, not bad at all. Of course, I wouldn't have tried to share it if it wasn't. As for your question, I'd have to admit that I do not have many experiences regarding such. Ichigo nodded in understanding. He didn't really see His Majesty or Jugram allowing Gremmy to leave Silburn, so that was to be expected. Maybe he could buy some sweets for him and Liltato when he visited Karakura town. No, scratch that, he needed to buy something for 4 more people in that case. It wasn't like the Sternritter were actually banned from leaving Silburn though, since the only reason Ichigo needed permission to visit his mother's grave was the fact that Karakura town had been the center of recent spiritual activities. But Gremmy had been confined in his quarters alone until recently, due to an incident of him losing control over his imagination. From what he heard, it hadn't been pretty, with all 3 members of the Schutzstaffel and Jugram being barely able to subdue Gremmy without killing him. That incident served to show just how powerful Gremmy was, even if the 4 other Sternritter had been aiming to subduing him, which was much harder in comparison to simply killing the target. Some of the Sternritter wondered just why he had yet to be accepted into the ranks of the Schutzstaffel, but Ichigo knew that the elites of the Sternritter were exceptional in both power and loyalty. Gremmy certainly qualified for the former, but the latter, he didn't really think so. Not to say Gremmy wasn't loyal to the Emperor, but he wasn't as fanatically loyal as the elites were. Then again, Ichigo himself was the successor of Yhwach, so maybe he was just overthinking things. Liltato sharing her sweets, though. I rarely see that happen, said Ichigo, as he finished with the cookie. He could count the times Liltato shared anything she had to him with his fingers, and considering how they had known for nearly a whole year at this point, it was a rare occasion indeed. I'm not surprised, Gremmy said with a shrug, and started to walk away. I'll be off then, Mr. Kurosaki. I'd imagine you'd be starving. Ichigo frowned when he indeed felt like starving, and inwardly cursed Gremmy for it. After using his own shrift to counter what Gremmy did, he quickly found his way to the mess hall. Even if he made himself forget the fact that he was hungry, he still wanted to take something for Giselle to eat when she woke up. Inoue Orihime was by no means a powerhouse. While her ability to reject reality was easily able to achieve the impossible, she had neither the Raryoku reserve nor power to restore every single Shinigami in dire condition. So she settled for stabilizing the injuries of some of the more serious patients, and left the rest to the 4th Division. It was no secret that her attention would need to be directed on the captain-level fighters before the Quincy made their next move, but she couldn't help it when she saw someone who required her immediate help. You should rest a little, Inoue-san. As much as we appreciate your help, you shouldn't overexert yourself for our sake. Orihime wanted to say that she was okay and keep on with her task, but the stern look on Azane's face was more than enough to make her reconsider. The lieutenant had adopted her captain's demeanor a bit more ever since she left to face the Central 46 for her promotion to the post of the head captain, and the team found it rather hard for her to say no to her kind offer. All right. Good. Also, I've heard that some of the captains here would like to have a few words with you, Inoue-san. So if you don't mind. Oh, I'll be right there. Sorry, Inoue-san. Azane trailed off, before someone called for her help. She sent an apologetic look at the orange-haired girl and quickly left, leaving Orihime to her own device. In truth, there weren't many people she knew in the Soul Society, and most of them were currently busy or recovering. So she made her way to a part of the infirmary where the captains were recovering, having nothing better to do. She found herself facing Captain Hitsugaya Tashira, Captain Kuchiki Byakuya and Captain Kyaraku Shunsui at the same time as soon as she entered the room. It seemed that Captain Yukitaki Yashira and Captain Mugaruma Kensai have yet to recover their consciousness. Well, it sure feels like I'll recover a lot faster now with the company of a beautiful lady, Shunsui joked while sending a wink towards Orihime with his remaining eye. She fanned herself with her hand, flustered from the blatant flirting. The fact that his lost eye hadn't been restored properly didn't escape her notice, and she reminded herself to take care of that when she had enough Raryoku to spare. Thanks, Captain Kyaraku. Both of the other captains gave the elder captain a look of mild disgust, causing Shunsui to wave his hands while stating that he was only joking out of habit. Orihime hesitantly sat down on a spare bed at the eldest captain's suggestion, the one that had been occupied by Rose before he left with Shinji for some reason. First of all, we, as in the captains of the Gote 13, are all in your debt, Inoue-san. It hurts our pride to admit it, but it is quite obvious that we wouldn't have been able to prepare ourselves for the next Quincy invasion in time without your help, and for that we are all grateful." Byakuya not only gave his word of gratitude, but bowed his head in order to show that he was indeed grateful. The act was soon followed by Toshiro and Shunsui, the latter adopting a more serious expression instead of his usual laid-back one. Orihime was lost of words at the rather uncomfortable situation, though. She wasn't really sure of how she should react in a situation like this, where three people who were much older than herself showed such respect and gratitude towards her. To her relief, the uncomfortable silence didn't last long. "We've known how Kurosaki Ichigo and his mother suffered under the acts of my lieutenant and Captain Kuretsuchi, but to accept that he now stands as an enemy of the Soul Society was not easy. Being a close friend of his, we are under no delusion that making the decision to help us was an easy one on your part." Byakuya added. "Indeed, so it would do you well to know that you are more than deserving of our thankfulness. None of us would have been able to regain our conscience at this point if it weren't for your aid," said Toshiro with a nod. But his expression darkened moments later. "Kurosaki Ichigo has more than enough reasons to stand against us, but that does not mean we can afford to show him mercy when we face him in the next invasion. He has proven himself to be a serious threat with the defeat of our head captain." A shade was cast over Shunsui's face when his old mentor was mentioned, but he quickly shook it off. He was old enough to know that such things were bound to happen during a war, so he tried not to hold it against the former substitute Shinigami. Technically speaking, it was Yhwach who had marked the end of Yamamoto Genria, Sai Shigekuni's life, so Shunsui tried to direct most of the pent-up emotions to the Quincy King. The current Gotei 13 has been weakened enough to deem Kurosaki Ichigo as an immediate threat that must be dealt with accordingly, so we cannot afford to spare him even with all his deeds of the past. If anything, all of those are nothing as of this moment with the sin he committed by the death of Captain Kuretsuchi and the head captain. Even if he decides to surrender, or if we manage to subdue him by some miracle, he will be sentenced to Muken. We wanted to let you know that beforehand," Toshiro concluded, not mentioning the fact that they weren't that confident of their victory over the Wandenreich in their current situation. The Zero Division had decided to interfere, which should have been more than enough of an assurance to their victory in most cases. But all the preparation the Quincy had made for this second war during the time of their hiding made the captains doubt the possibility that the Wandenreich had yet to prepare to face the Zero Division too. "I understand," Orihime murmured with a sorrowful look, knowing fully well that she hadn't made the best decision she could have made. But she wasn't ready to suddenly let go of all the relationship they had forged with the Shinigami of the Soul Society on a whim, with all those people who were deeply in need of her help. Some would call her an idiot for choosing the side that was losing badly, and some would call her a traitor for standing against her friend, or more like the person she loved. But she quickly shook the thought away, knowing that regretting a decision she had already made wouldn't do any good for her. Orihime also reminded herself that Ichigo already had someone beside him if the girl she saw earlier with him was any indication of it. With the main topic out of the way, Kuchiki Byakuya's thoughts wandered towards the matter of his currently missing lieutenant. He was under no illusion that Abarai Renji would be somehow alive at this point. His sister had already told him somewhat about the encounter she had with Kurosaki Ichigo and his intention of taking his revenge on Renji. Byakuya doubted that Kurosaki Ichigo would have allowed a quick death to his lieutenant, but also hoped that he did. His opinion on the former substitute Shinigami was by no means low, even to the point of understanding Ichigo's decision of standing against the Soul Society as their enemy. Still, he was a captain of the Gotei 13 who had sworn to protect the Seraiti. Such thoughts were irrelevant with the current situation, so he promptly discarded them. He had a more important task at his hand to be distracted by inappropriate thoughts. To hone his Shikai to its maximum potential as soon as he could, to deal with the loss of his Bankai. It was a public knowledge that Urahara Kazuki had started to find a way to counter the Quincy's method of stealing their Bankai, but how much time did they have until the second strike? Not that Byakuya was doubting the eccentric genius, but it was a race against time which wouldn't be easy for the man. "I've come to rely on my Bankai too much." The same thought crossed the minds of Toshiro and Byakuya, and they vowed to defeat the Quincy they had faced earlier during the invasion at all costs. The Sternritter that now possessed the two captains' own Bankai at their disposal was no one else's responsibility but theirs to deal with. It was about 10 minutes later when Orihime left the room to allow herself some well-deserved rest, but only after taking care of Shunsui's lost eye with her Shunrika. She couldn't help but to feel exhausted when she was done restoring the captain's eye, almost draining herself of her Raryoku reserves. Orihime was glad that she could be of help to the captain, but there were some thoughts that kept on bothering her throughout the day. What would her friends think of her decision to help the Soul Society? How would their friendship end up when this war was over? Would they ever be able to become close friends again, just as they were before everything happened? For some reason, even the ever-optimistic Orihime wasn't able to think up of a positive answer to that question. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to like, comment and subscribe, as well as checking out the author on fanfiction.net.